The NBA just recently said goodbye to one of the greatest players in Chicago Bulls history, as Derrick Rose decided to call it quits at the age of 35. Rose was a 6'3" point guard who came into the league as the first overall pick in the 2008 draft. What immediately stood out about Derrick is how he was one of the most athletically gifted and explosive point guards that the league has ever seen. Not only was he lightning fast, but he cut to the basket and finished at the rim as if he was always angry. He was like the point guard version of Shawn Kemp. We've seen a lot of explosive point guards throughout the years, like Russell Westbrook, Steve Francis, and Ja Morant, just to name a few. But if you ask me, none of those guys were quite as explosive as Derrick Rose was at his peak. Not only was he a thunderous dunker, but he was one of the best finishers in league history, as he was equipped with an all-time great layup package. He was the Rookie of the Year winner in the 08-09 season, and he earned 3 consecutive All-Star selections between 2010 and 2012. The very peak of his career was in 2011 though, which was when he led his Chicago Bulls to a 62-20 record, which was good enough for the best record in the entire league. That year, he averaged 25 points, 8 assists, and 4 rebounds on nearly 45% shooting. Thanks to this incredible season-long performance, he was rewarded with a league MVP, ahead of Dwight Howard, LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, and Kevin Durant. This made Rose the youngest MVP in league history, as he was only 22 years old, with seemingly his best years long ahead of him. It's also worth noting that this Chicago group was the best defense in the entire league, but they were also in the bottom half of the league offensively. If it wasn't for Rose, they would have been easily one of the top 5 worst offenses in the NBA. I remember it being a massive talking point in the 2011 season, but nowadays, Rose doesn't get nearly enough credit for carrying that team offensively, and he did it in a similar fashion to Allen Iverson in 2001. They made it all the way to the 2011 Eastern Conference Finals, before they were outmatched by LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh of the Miami Heat. Despite the fact that Chicago just lost to Miami in 5 games, and despite the fact that Miami bolstered a super team, people were still speculating whether or not Rose would lead the Bulls to be a rival to the Heat. That's the level of confidence that we all had in this man's potential. Unfortunately, you all know what happened next. After finishing the 2011-2012 regular season with the best record in the NBA, Rose went down with an ACL tear in his first game of the 2012 playoffs. He had 23 points, 9 rebounds, and 9 assists at the time he got injured. A devastated Bulls team lost 4 out of the next 5 games, as they were easily eliminated by the 8th-seeded Philadelphia 76ers. Not only did Rose miss the entirety of the 2012 playoffs, but he also missed the entirety of the 2012-2013 season. He then returned in the 2013-14 regular season, but was only able to play in 10 regular season games before an injury to his right meniscus shut down that season as well. By the time that Rose finally got back to a healthy state on the basketball court, he no longer had the same explosiveness, and understandably, he often seemed timid about testing his new limits. Rose eventually became a journeyman playing for New York, Cleveland, Minnesota, Detroit, and Memphis. But at best, he was a role player during those seasons, as most of the basketball community, including yours truly, was hoping and waiting for him to return to the level of his former glory. For a short period of time, he did have a bit of a resurgence in Minnesota, and even had a 50-point game against the Utah Jazz, which occurred on Halloween night 2018. It's fondly remembered as one of the better feel-good moments in NBA history, as even Rose was emotional after the game was over. In reality, Rose only had the first 4 seasons of his career as a top-tier player. So now, after his retirement, people are beginning to question whether or not he deserves a spot in the Basketball Hall of Fame. First off, I understand why a lot of people think he shouldn't get in. Rose only had 4 seasons of elite level basketball, and he technically never even reached the prime of his career. If we're simply putting him in the Hall of Fame for what we think he would have been, then that's an unfair and inconsistent standard, since there are many other players who are not currently in that should get in by that logic. The thing is, of the major American sports, basketball probably has the lowest bar for the Hall of Fame. For example, Tracy McGrady was inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame in 2017, and much of his career was also seen as a what if, since his playing days were cut short due to his various injuries. T-Mac was a 2-time scoring champion, a 7-time All-Star, and won the Most Improved Player award in 2001. But when you compare that to the resume of Derrick Rose, we really have to ask ourselves which player was more accomplished, as Rose was the Rookie of the Year winner in 2009. He earned 3 All-Star selections, and he was the youngest MVP in NBA history in 2011. And that alone is an impressive feat that immortalizes him. Then you have to consider the context of his impact. Outside of the Michael Jordan days, the Bulls franchise has never had much success before or since. And yet, a young athlete in his early 20s led them all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals, where they competed with a legitimate super team. Sure, the greatness of Rose was short-lived, but in terms of a player's peak, there's a lot of guys in the Basketball Hall of Fame who never got close to reaching the level of greatness that Rose reached in his early 20s. In conclusion, if guys like Tracy McGrady and Grant Hill are considered good enough to get in, then I don't see how it's fair to keep a guy like Derrick Rose out. So what do you guys think? Does Rose deserve to be in the Basketball Hall of Fame? And how high do you think his ceiling was without the injuries? I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comment section below. This wasn't a video that I was planning on making today, but at the time I'm recording this audio, the NBA just lost a legend. His name is Bill Walton, and he passed away at the age of 71 after a long battle with cancer. Bill Walton is somebody that I remember being involved in the game of basketball as a whole for many, many years. And he was a legend on and off the court. In college basketball, he is arguably the greatest college basketball player of all time. At the very least, he's right in the conversation with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, as he won 2 national championships with UCLA. In the NBA, he won 2 championships. One of them was as the best player, where he led his Portland Trail Blazers to the only championship they've ever had in franchise history, which occurred in 1977. The second championship was as the 6th man of the year, and that was playing for the 1986 Boston Celtics. Everybody thinks of Larry Bird, Robert Parrish, and Kevin McHale, but usually an afterthought to that team is Bill Walton, and he was massive to their dominant success that year. Now, Walton had a really unique legacy in the sense that he was an NBA legend, but he was also one of the greatest what-ifs in basketball history. The guy had a deep and vast injury history, to the point that I've called him the most injury-prone player of all time, even more so than guys like Anthony Davis.
Yeah. And the whole genesis of this came about this past summer when I had my 31st operation.
Now see, that's what, on your feet?
On my feet,
most
of them.
That's what I was talking about. That's crazy, isn't it?
In his first 4 seasons, while dealing with injuries, Walton was a league leader in blocks and rebounds. He was a league MVP, he was an NBA champion, and he was a finals MVP. He was already making an entrance into the competition of the greatest centers of all time. Now when you look at his skills, it's no surprise why. He was an above-average scorer, he was an elite shot blocker, he was a dominating force on the boards, and he was simply one of the greatest passing big men of all time, especially from the post. Unfortunately, his injuries, and especially his foot injuries, would really start to take their toll after his first 4 seasons. Between the summer of 1978 and the summer of 1982, he only played a total of 14 games. He was never the same as his dominant self in his youth. Even with all those injuries, obviously he was a basketball legend based on the first 4 seasons of his career. And thanks to that resume, he was honored as one of the 75 greatest players of all time. But you'd be very wrong if you thought that was all there was to Bill Walton. Walton built himself a legacy after the NBA as well. In my mind, he quickly became one of the voices of basketball, as he spent time being an analyst and a commentator for both the NBA and college basketball. There's a few ways I remember him, but one of them is that Walton was one of the greatest and most animated storytellers that I ever saw. He was just so animated, so enthusiastic, and his passion for the game of basketball was just so visible as he was sharing the details with the audience. Comically, I also remember him as one of the biggest overstaters of all time. Genuinely, I mean that. Me and my brother and my dad used to make jokes about it all the time. He was so quick to over-dramatize his analysis and make big statements that sometimes seemed a little premature, but it was funny because it was Bill Walton and that was his thing. Very frequently, he would be quick to call something the greatest ever, and he'd do it in the most theatrical way possible.
Yes, they're looking forward, and why not?
Unbelievable steal for Mitch Kupchak. He's right in the mix for executive of the decade.
Wow.
Hey, that's ridiculous.
What does Danny Ainge think about that? Hey, coming up a little bit later, let's talk about Shaquille O'Neal. What kind of adjustments, what kind of Shaq do you expect to see tonight? How much better?
The Shaq landing here in the desert is just all too perfect with what's going on in the world out there, especially with the USA 193 satellite expected to come crashing down to Earth any day now here.
They shot it today.
This is not the first time this has happened, because approximately 50,000 years ago, a giant meteor came and crushed down in the northern desert up by Flagstaff in between the Grand Canyon. It was absolutely spectacular, and that's what's happened with Shaq just come crashing down in the beautiful, great state of Arizona. And when you also think about Shaq in Arizona, you have to think of the Grand Canyon. Come on, this place is so perfect. You get there, it's
Same
so
size.
huge.
Bring that high, hard one in. I stand in and lean back, and then just bam. And it sails away out through the universe like a radio wave that goes past Saturn and Jupiter, Pluto, through the black hole, and into many other galaxies yet named.
Beyond that, Walton didn't have much of a filter. He would say whatever was on his mind, whether it was harsh or whether it was kind, it didn't matter. He also didn't really think through his statements a lot of the times before he made them, and because of that, you'd often get statements from him that were just utterly hilarious and would go viral.
Just like all the Kings fans with DeMarcus Cousins, I want more. I don't want a 6-inch, I want a 12-inch from DeMarcus Cousins.
I remember him for being random, entertaining, enthusiastic, and always having a big smile while making everyone laugh around him, even if he wasn't intending to.
I'm not a very good catcher. I'm much better at getting high than getting low.
The way it usually does when Huskies and Bears get together. You ever seen Huskies and Bears fight? Because usually what happens when that happens is that the dogs come in and they nip and tuck around the Bears, who just kind of stand there and look around, and then eventually the Bears get tired of these little antagonistic Huskies. So the Bears, they just come and they just smash the Huskies. And that's what's happened right now. What are you talking about? I'm talking about Bears and Huskies, the matchup that we have tonight.
Birthday, happy birthday. What's your name in there?
Take a bite out of it while it's lit.
Well, it's lit.
Say, oh, I'm kidding. I can't.
Happy birthday, happy birthday. The moon, still up there, bright as can be.
What's wrong with you?
Ultimately, he was a great personality. He brought joy and smiles to people all around him, and he was one of the greatest basketball players of all time.
That's a fifth floor problem.
Not in my house. No. Not today.
I thought this might happen, so we have some helium here. I'll give you this, and then just say certainly, all right? Or nyuk, 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 whichever you prefer. You're well over 6 feet taller than me. I'm not going to quibble and quabble. Here we go. You have to suck it all in. You're under...
If anything ever happens to the guy that does the voice of Cookie Monster, I can sleep at night knowing we have Dikembe Mutombo as a backup.
Would you say C is for cookie?
C for cookie.
Recently, the NBA tragically lost a legend, who should be in the discussion of the greatest modern defender in NBA history, but he usually isn't. His name was Dikembe Mutombo, or at least that was his abbreviated name. He was a 7'2" center who played 18 seasons in the NBA, and he spent that time with the Nuggets, Hawks, 76ers, Nets, Knicks, and the Houston Rockets. He's not usually brought up as one of the great examples of longevity, but he certainly could be, as Mount Mutombo was extremely effective for almost every team he played for in his time in the NBA. A great example of his longevity is the fact that Dikembe won the Defensive Player of the Year award at the age of 34, which makes him easily the oldest player in NBA history to win the award. In total, Dikembe won 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards, and he led the league in blocked shots 3 times in his career, getting as high as an absurd 4.5 blocks per game in 1996. What's one of the most impressive details about him is the fact that he won his 4 DPOYs and 3 blocks titles during an era where he was competing against David Robinson, Shaquille O'Neal, Patrick Ewing, Alonzo Mourning, and Hakeem Olajuwon. I can only imagine the amount of defensive accolades he would have accumulated if he was born in a different era and competing in the 2010s in place of, say, Dwight Howard. He did more than just that though, as Mutombo also led the league in rebounds per game twice in his career, getting as high as 14.1 in the 99-2000 season. As one of the greatest rim protectors in the history of the league, he earned 6 All-Defense teams, and during that time, he was always letting offensive players know about it, as he was consistently swatting the shot and then giving his iconic finger wag. That wasn't the only iconic aspect of his career though. One of his iconic moments came in the 1994 playoffs, where he was a part of one of the greatest upsets in basketball history, when his 8th-seeded Denver Nuggets came back from an 0-2 deficit to beat the 1st-seeded Seattle Supersonics in 5 games. In that series, Mutombo was utterly insane, as he averaged an astonishing 6.2 blocks per game. What people often don't realize, and very rarely mention, is that he was also ridiculous in that next series, and his Nuggets nearly achieved history again, as they came back from an 0-3 deficit to the Utah Jazz, and forced a deciding 7th game. Over the course of that series, Mutombo averaged 5.4 blocks per game, as he was widely recognized at that point as the game's greatest rim protector. The thing is, Dikembe Mutombo was so much more than just a great basketball player, but he was a wonderful ambassador for the league, and a well-known humanitarian. He created the Dikembe Mutombo Foundation in order to improve the quality of life and living conditions for people in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Beyond that, Mutombo was also a major influence for the Special Olympics, as he was a member of the Special Olympics International Board of Directors, and he was one of their global ambassadors. Recently, the Atlanta Hawks released a statement on the passing of Mutombo. "We are deeply saddened by the news of Dikembe Mutombo's passing. Dikembe was a proud and honorable man who lived up to the definition of a word that became synonymous with his name, humanitarian. He used his many gifts and his platform to improve the lives of everyone he encountered, especially in his homeland of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and throughout Africa. His passion for the game, its growth, and the joy he brought to defense, including his undeniable presence and iconic finger wag, made him a star on the court and with the fans around the globe. I was fortunate to have been able to call him a friend. My family and I were beyond proud to have him represent the Hawks organization on and off the court. With his jersey in the rafters, his life and legacy will always be remembered in Atlanta. On behalf of the entire Hawks organization, our thoughts, prayers, and support are with Rose and their family at this difficult time. and this comment was on behalf of the principal owner, Tony Ressler. Obviously, the NBA didn't just lose one of the greatest defensive players in the history of the game, but it lost an ambassador of the game and a kind spirit. He was the kind of legend that improved the NBA's image by merely existing, and is the ideal player to pass the torch from one generation to the next. So now I'm turning it to you guys. What do you think was the most impressive thing about Dikembe Mutombo? I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments section below. Obviously, Kobe Bryant is one of the greatest basketball players of all time. But usually, when the GOAT debate comes up, most people will act like there's no genuine case for Kobe. From my experience, if you suggest it, you'll usually get scoffed at, laughed at, or even mocked for simply bringing it up. In most cases, the major reason why people respond like this is because most people agree that Kobe wasn't even the most accomplished player at his position. That was Michael Jordan. MJ had more championships, more MVPs, and far more finals MVPs, while being the more accomplished defensive player, and while being the more efficient field goal shooter. Again, reasons like these are why Michael Jordan is my GOAT as well. But the thing is, there's no definitive way to solidify the rankings. It's all a matter of opinion. Usually people like me acknowledge MJ as the GOAT because he was the most overall accomplished and iconic player. But saying that it's completely subjective, there's other ways to look at this debate. For example, Bill Russell was the greatest winner, as he secured 11 championships, and his game was played in such a way that allowed his team to thrive around him. So who are we to argue against his case, when he has the best case on winning basketball? Another angle on the GOAT debate is boiling it down to who was the most impressive, in the sense of which player overcame the most. Another way of putting it is which player made the most of the cards that he was dealt. In my opinion, there's a really strong case for Kobe in that regard, as he had to deal with things that many other greats never had to deal with. For one, Kobe didn't have a single all-star supporting him during the prime of his career. Think about how many GOAT candidates can't say that. Michael Jordan can't make that claim because he had Scottie Pippen. LeBron James can't make that claim because he had Dwayne Wade. Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain, Magic Johnson, and Larry Bird each had a collection of all-stars supporting them in their primes. Yet for Kobe Bryant, he had no other all-star help when he was between the ages of 26 and 28. He had guys like Chris Mim, Kwame Brown, Luke Walton, and Smush Parker regularly in the starting lineup. Those are guys who would struggle to get roster spots on most other teams in that era. But due to some of the organization's poor choices after the departure of Shaquille O'Neal, that's what the Mamba had to work with during his absolute apex. Every team who opposed the Lakers in those years were solely focused on containing Bryant. Yet the Mamba still averaged as high as 35 points per game while being first team all defense. He dropped 81 points against the Raptors, including 55 points in the second half alone. He dropped 62 points in just 3 quarters, single-handedly outscoring the Mavericks, who would go on to the NBA Finals that season. He scored at least 50 points in 4 straight games, and he managed to do all of this while playing during one of the lowest scoring eras of NBA history. Just imagine how different some legacies would look if the players didn't have any quality support during their prime. Imagine Michael Jordan with no help between 1991 and 1993. Imagine LeBron James with no help between 2012 and 2014. Imagine Shaquille O'Neal with no help between 2000 and 2002. It completely changes everything, and certainly drops their ring count severely, while also dropping their standings among the all-time greats. Kobe should have been competing for championships those years, but instead, he had to settle for just 5 rings, as if that isn't impressive enough. Kobe's help, or lack thereof, was only a part of the equation though. The other aspect that truly makes the Mamba's legacy insanely impressive is the fact that he accomplished so much despite having one of the longest lists of injuries that the game of basketball has ever seen. Just look at this graphic of the Mamba and and evaluate everything he had to go through in order to succeed. Based on this list, Kobe should be a massive what if, and not a freaking GOAT candidate. How do you sprain so many limbs, break so many bones, and tear so many ligaments, yet you still manage to accumulate 5 championships, 2 scoring titles, 12 all-defense teams, an MVP, and end up being 4th on the NBA's all-time scoring list? That wasn't supposed to happen. Nowadays, players sit out games just because they're tired. But Kobe went out there and won his 5th championship ring while having a broken index finger on his shooting hand. After Kobe's famous 05-06 season, he had arthroscopic knee surgery, which is a procedure that has devastated the careers of some of the most promising players of all time, like Penny Hardaway, for example. Yet Kobe went on to break records and win 2 more championships with a totally different group from the one he helped win the first 3. Essentially, Kobe was a warrior on the court, and his resume should not have been as strong as it ended up being. Yes, we can talk about the numbers, stats, and ring counts, but Kobe overcame stuff because of his attributes that are well beyond the stat sheet. During his playing days, Kobe broke his shooting hand. He tore ligaments in his right wrist. He tore his rotator cuff. He fractured his knee, tore his Achilles, dislocated fingers, broke fingers, severely sprained both ankles numerous times, and he underwent numerous major surgeries on his shoulders, knees, and feet. And again, beyond the injuries, don't forget about the talent. Give 1993 Michael Jordan, Luke Walton, Smush Parker, and Lamar Odom, and see how far he gets. Same can be said for just about any other great player in the top 10 list. To summarize it all, no one overcame more to achieve a top 10 resume than Kobe Bryant did. And from that very specific and unique angle, one could at least make the argument that he's the most impressive player in NBA history. Although he's not my choice as the GOAT, I would at least hear a respectable argument from someone who believes he is. So what do you guys think? Is there any player who had to overcome greater obstacles than the Mamba? Just who is the most underrated player in the history of the NBA? I've given my opinion on the topic several times before, and I've even changed my mind a couple times as well. I'm sure each of you guys will have your own choices in the comments section below, but specifically, this faithful viewer of mine believes it's Bob Lanier, and he lets me know about it every single time I post a video. But I gotta say, he's got quite the case. Bob Lanier played 14 seasons in the NBA, and as a 6'11 center, he became a basketball Hall of Famer. When Bob came into the NBA, he was actually already dealing with significant injuries. He actually didn't want to play in his rookie season in the NBA, since his knee was in really bad shape and was sore almost every single day. But he was receiving tons of pressure from the Detroit Pistons organization to go out there on the court. And so that's what he did. And while playing on a bad knee, he had a rookie season where he averaged 15.6 points and 8.1 rebounds per game and only 24.6 minutes of action. He played all 82 games that year. It was the following season where things would really take off, as he averaged 25.7 points and 14.2 rebounds on 49.3% shooting. Lanier was not only a powerful force, but he had tons of grace to his game as well, and he was quite the perimeter shooter. As a smooth lefty, he dominated opposing bigs, as he was equipped with a solid hook shot to go along with his reliable jump shot. Over the course of his career, he averaged about 20 points and 10 rebounds per game, as he was always filling up the stat sheet, and he got as high as 3rd overall in the MVP voting. But here's the reason why he's so underappreciated and rarely recognized. Bob didn't do much winning throughout his NBA career, and he missed the NBA playoffs quite often. The biggest reason for that was his dysfunctional Detroit Pistons organization, as upper management was always indecisive and struggled with commitment. During his time in Detroit, he played under 8 different head coaches in the span of 10 seasons. Every single one of those coaches was either hired or fired during the regular season. So with that in mind, it's no wonder why they had a hard time making a deep postseason run. He was a championship caliber player, but unfortunately, he just never got a legitimate shot at that championship ring due to the poor decision making from the upper management. During the 1979 to 1980 season, he finally got a shot with a contending team as he joined the Milwaukee Bucks. This Bucks squad was equipped with reliable weapons like Sidney Moncrief, who was great on offense and who would also go on to be a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year winner. And they also had Marcus Johnson, who knew how to get buckets in bunches. The tragedy, though, is that he was 31 years old at the time he joined the Bucks, and by that point, his knees had deteriorated to such an extent that he was no longer the same player that he once was. And even Bob himself has expressed his frustration about that reality, as he has stated that he wished he had guys like Sidney Moncrief and Marcus Johnson earlier in his career. That way he could have been competing for championships at a very young age. In total, he was an 8-time NBA All-Star, who at his peak was averaging as high as 26 points and 14 rebounds per game. Simply put, on an individual level, this guy was one of the most dominant big men in NBA history. But he just happened to be one of those guys who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Recently, the NBA lost a legend who wasn't just a famous icon within the sport, but he was literally the unofficial logo of the game of basketball, Jerry Allen West. He was 86 years old and has been having a tremendous impact on the league longer than most of us have been alive. As a player, this 6'3" point guard / shooting guard was one of the greatest players of his generation and on both ends of the court. His style of play offensively was so ahead of his time in the 60s and early 70s, as he had a solid handle of the basketball and had a dangerous pull-up jumper that would have translated well to the modern NBA. He was teammates with the great Elgin Baylor in 12 out of his 14 seasons in the league, and as a dynamic duo, they both had unique impacts on their offense. The famous longtime Lakers commentator Chick Hearn referred to Baylor as Mr. Inside, while West was Mr. Outside. Jerry didn't have the luxury of playing in the three-point era since he retired in 1974 and the three-point line wasn't introduced to the league until 1979. One can only imagine how many points per game West would have averaged if many of his perimeter jumpers had counted as 3 points instead. Among players with completed careers, West has the 4th highest scoring average in NBA history at 27. He has the 5th highest playoff scoring average of all time at 29.1, and he has the 5th highest final scoring average of all time at 30.5. Every step as the season progressed, from the regular season to the playoffs to the finals, West became a much better scorer. This big game lethality is why he earned the famous nickname Mr. Clutch. There are many examples of that clutch gene being on display. One of those was in the 1965 NBA playoffs, where West's Lakers made it to the NBA Finals, where they were eventually defeated by the Boston Celtics. In that entire playoff run, West averaged 40.6 points per game, 6 rebounds, and 5 assists. Jerry played in 11 games in those playoffs, and with a minimum of 4 games played, that is the highest scoring average in a single postseason run in NBA history. Another example of his clutch gene was the 1969 NBA Finals, where West had arguably the greatest final series that the league had ever seen. In Game 1, he carried his Lakers to a clutch 2-point victory, where he efficiently dropped 53 points and 10 assists. He ended up scoring 40 points in 4 out of those 7 games. In the 7th and deciding game, he made history, as he dropped 42 points, 13 rebounds, and 12 assists. To this day, West is one of only 3 players to achieve the 40-point triple-double in the NBA Finals, and West is the only player to ever do it in a 7th game. He put up monstrous numbers over the course of that series, but unfortunately, West's Lakers lost in the 7th game by just 2 points. Regardless, his series-long performance was so legendary that he was named the Finals MVP, despite the fact that he played for the losing team. To this day, West is the only player to ever win the Finals MVP while playing for the losing side. Beyond being extremely productive in big games, West was basically automatic in the final few seconds. and his career was filled with game winners and buzzer beaters. None more famous than when he made this 60-foot shot in Game 3 of the 1970 NBA Finals as time expired, and this sent the game to overtime. At this point, you might be thinking that West was basically just a scorer, but you couldn't possibly be more incorrect. He was an elite passer, and especially in the second half of his career, he focused more of his game on his facilitating. In the 1971-72 season, the Lakers had a really talented group, with guys like Wilt Chamberlain, Gail Goodrich, and Jim McMillan as the supporting cast to West. Their brand new head coach was the Hall of Famer Bill Sharman, who actually competed against West in the past as a player for the Boston Celtics. Sharman wanted to run an up-tempo offense, and wanted West to spend more of his energy facilitating. As the floor general, Jerry led the 72 Lakers to a historic run, as he led the entire league in assists per game at 9.7, while also pouring in 26 points and 4 rebounds. West led the Lakers to the greatest winning streak in basketball history, as they won a whopping 33 straight regular season games before finishing the season with a 69-13 record. With Jerry at the helm, the Lakers had a 12-3 record that postseason, as they won the NBA championship and solidified their case for the title of the greatest team in NBA history. With this ring, West had finally broken through and won that elusive championship, after years of falling to Bill Russell and the more talented Boston Celtics. In fact, West had a 1-8 NBA Finals record, which has led many modern fans to question the legitimacy of his Mr. Clutch nickname. But when you understand the context of his era, and the fact that the opposing Celtics were loaded with way more Hall of Famers, while West was still playing incredible in his losing performances, then it starts to make a bit more sense. Easily, the most underrated part of his game, though, was his all-time great defense. Jerry was known by his peers as a smothering defensive player, and was especially skilled at causing turnovers. Simply put, he was one of the greatest pickpockets in the history of the game, and he was one of the greatest shot-blocking guards that the game had ever seen as well. Unfortunately, he simply played in the wrong era for all of his defensive stats and accolades to be tracked. For one, blocks and steals were not officially tracked until the 1973-74 season, which just happened to be West's final year in the NBA at the age of 35. But in that farewell season, he averaged a stunning 2.6 steals and 0.7 blocks, and both of those were good enough to lead the league at his position. If those were the kind of defensive numbers that he was putting up at the age of 35, then I can only imagine how many he was getting during his prime. Beyond that, he made a total of 5 All-Defense teams in his career, but all 5 of those honors came after he entered his 30s, since All-Defense teams did not exist prior to the 1968-69 season. So not only should he be among the all-time leaders in steals, not only should he be among the all-time blocks leaders for guards, but he could possibly have had the most All-Defense team selections for any guard of all time, if the honors had always existed. To put it simply, he was one of the greatest all-around players that the game has ever seen. In total, he earned 14 All-Star selections, 5 All-Defense teams, won the scoring title in 1970, won the assist title in 1972, was the Finals MVP in 1969, and won the NBA championship in 1972. Again, he achieved all of this as a perimeter shooter at a time when the three-point line didn't exist yet. Imagine what his resume would look like if it had. Now here's the craziest part. All of that might have been the less impressive part of Jerry West's basketball career, because soon after his career was done as a player, he moved into head coaching and executive positions. Just 2 seasons after his retirement, he was hired to be the Lakers head coach, thanks to his good relationship with the team's owner, and thanks to his excellent leadership skills he displayed while playing for the Purple and Gold. After the Lakers had failed to make the playoffs in back-to-back seasons, West stepped in and coached the Lakers to 3 straight playoff appearances, including a trip to the Western Conference Finals in his first year at the helm. Now, after those 3 coaching seasons were done, he moved into a different role that he was more passionate about, which was a lead scout. For 3 years, he evaluated talent and helped the Lakers organization make selections that would build their next dynasty. Eventually, he got promoted and became the general manager of the Los Angeles Lakers in 1982. And one of the first major moves he made in that position was drafting big game James Worthy in the 1982 NBA draft. Worthy was the perfect complementary star to Magic Johnson's fast-paced offense. With the team, Worthy would go on to win 3 championships in Los Angeles, including the season where he was the Finals MVP in 1988. After the retirement of Magic Johnson in 1991, the Lakers' future was in question. But West quickly rebuilt the team into a competitive force and had them in the conference semifinals by 1995. That year, he was honored as the NBA Executive of the Year. But he was just getting started. Under his leadership, the Lakers were ready to take the next step, and in a major way. On July 11th, 1996, West made an extremely bold move, as he traded the Lakers starting center Vlade Divac for a 17-year-old fresh out of high school Kobe Bryant. This was an extremely gutsy move at the time, because Kobe was seen as a bit of an unproven wild card, while Vlade was the team's starting center when they went to the 1991 NBA Finals. Although the Lakers traded for Kobe from the Hornets, who took him with the 13th overall pick, West has said that he would have taken Kobe with the first overall pick if he had the choice. Now the Lakers were without a starting center, and West looked to fill that role rather quickly, and he did it in a very explosive fashion. Just 1 week later, West shocked the basketball world by convincing Shaquille O'Neal to leave the Orlando Magic and sign with the Los Angeles Lakers. And just like that, West had built the foundation of a dynasty yet again. Shaq and Kobe would go on to win 3 championships together in 4 finals appearances. And after the Diesel's departure, Kobe would go on to win 2 more additional championships. Obviously, West's impact and influence as a Laker great had been immortalized. When you look at the combination of his playing career, his coaching career, and his executive career, he's probably the favorite for the title of the greatest overall Laker in franchise history. But he wasn't done having an impact on the game of basketball. Seeking more mountains to climb and conquer, West became the general manager of the Memphis Grizzlies between 2002 and 2007. In that time, he built a surprisingly competitive squad that was able to make the playoffs for the first time in franchise history. In fact, they went to the playoffs for 3 straight seasons under West. After a 4-year break, West joined the Golden State Warriors in 2011 as an executive board member and as a minority owner. He helped build the Dubs into yet another dynasty team. One of his more influential decisions came in 2014, when the Warriors were considering trading a young and upcoming Klay Thompson for a prime Kevin Love, who at the time was seen as one of the best bigs in the entire league. Jerry West was extremely opposed to his team trading Klay, and threatened to leave the organization if they made the deal. In light of this, the Warriors decided to keep Klay, and would go on to win 4 NBA championships for the Golden State Warriors. But that wasn't his only major contribution to the Dubs dynasty, as he was a major part of the recruitment pitch to sign Kevin Durant in 2016. After that, West was once again seeking yet another challenge, and decided to join the LA Clippers in 2017 as an executive board member and as a consultant. Although that team never became a dynasty under his watch, he did help them acquire lots of star power that translated into them being Western Conference contenders. In total, he won 1 championship as a player and 8 championships as an executive. But in reality, he contributed to way more titles than just that. Looking at his full resume, we have to ask ourselves, has there ever been one person who's been more influential to shaping the NBA's history than Jerry West? Honestly, it would be hard for me to say yes. Sadly, the NBA lost one of the greatest basketball minds of all time, and although he unofficially became the logo because of his playing career, in reality, he's a symbol of the game of basketball for so many reasons beyond that. West was the embodiment of a competitive spirit. You'll never find anyone more passionate about the game of basketball. Even well into his 80s, he never stopped seeking new challenges. He never stopped finding new ways to win. In a way, he was everything that basketball lovers aspire to be. He was driven, he was relentless, he was passionate, he was team-focused, and above all, he was a winner, all the way up to the very end. As a lifelong Lakers fan, and as a basketball fan in general, thank you for everything, Jerry West. So many of our smiles, so many of our victories, and so many of our days rejoicing all go back to you. People may argue about who the logo should be for years to come, but for obvious reasons, you'll always be the logo to me. I've talked about this multiple times on the channel before, but what I think is the most annoying thing about modern basketball discourse is how people talk about the supporting casts of their favorite player. Nowadays, people are so tribalistic and so fanatical about their favorite player that it doesn't just stop at bragging about their favorite player, but they feel like they also have to degrade their favorite player's supporting cast in order to make their guy stand out to an even greater extent. Jordan fans do it, Kobe fans do it, and LeBron fans do it as well. Without question, one of the biggest victims of this, and possibly the biggest victim of them all, is the former NBA All-Star Kevin Love. Nowadays, if you suggest that the 2014 to 2015 Cleveland Cavaliers were an NBA super team, you'll quickly be ridiculed by a plethora of LeBron fans. But let me tell you, back then, I was there. And when Kyrie Irving, LeBron James, and Kevin Love all ended up on the same team, that felt like it was an emergence of yet another LeBron-led super team. In hindsight, people are acting like Kevin Love was simply a role player and wasn't a legitimate star at the time he joined LeBron. And sure, I'm not going to deny the fact that he wasn't as good in Cleveland as he was in Minnesota. But there was reasons for that. Just like Chris Bosh before him, Kevin Love was joining a LeBron James-led team, and he was going from the number one scoring option to a third scoring option. And in a LeBron James-led offense, where he likes to orchestrate things as a ball-dominant floor general, guys like Chris Bosh and Kevin Love are often relegated to roles where they have to sit on the perimeter, which wasn't their style before joining LeBron James. So many of LeBron's fans tend to be really young basketball fans, which makes sense considering the fact that he's still an active player in the NBA. But because of that, I think a lot of the people who are rooting for LeBron are not usually familiar with Kevin Love in his prime. Without mincing words, Love was an absolute beast in Minnesota. He really took off at the age of 22 in the 2010 to 2011 season, as he won the NBA's Most Improved Player award. And that year, he averaged over 20 points per game and put up a ridiculous league-leading average of 15.2 rebounds per game. Consider the fact that since the turn of the millennium, no player other than Andre Drummond and Ben Wallace have ever averaged more rebounds per game in a single season than Kevin Love. That's how good of a rebounder he was. He was also 47% from the field and a stellar 41.7% from three-point range. At such a young age, he was already in the conversation of the best power forward in the NBA. He was the league's best rebounder, a top scorer, an incredible passer, and one of the best shooting big men that the game had to offer. The very next year was the 2011 to 2012 lockout-shortened season, and that year, Love averaged 26 points, 13.3 rebounds, and 2 assists, while hitting 45% of his shots. He was so solid that season that he finished 6th overall in the MVP voting. He missed a significant amount of time the following season due to an injury, but the year after was the 2013 to 2014 season. At the age of 25, he averaged 26 points, 12.5 rebounds, and 4.4 assists, while making nearly 46% of his shots and 38% of his threes. Love was not only a great player, but he was legitimately viewed as one of the best players in the entire league, and at one point was even an MVP candidate for an organization that usually doesn't win very much. And then what some people try to do is they'll then try to discredit Kevin Love in Minnesota by making the point that he never even made the NBA playoffs before joining forces with LeBron James. But my point is the same thing can be said about Kyrie Irving, and we don't use that narrative against him. If you want to look at how good Kevin Love was in Minnesota, then consider his impact on the team before and after he was on the roster. In Love's final season with the Minnesota Timberwolves, where he put up about 26 points and 13 rebounds, they had a 40-42 record. And after he departed for Cleveland, Minnesota plummeted to a disgusting 16-66 record. LeBron James fans always like to bring up the fact of how good LeBron-led teams were when he was on the roster and how much they plummeted after he departed. But for some reason, that same logic doesn't apply to Kevin Love. It's almost as if it doesn't fit the agenda. Now listen, in no way is this video meant to come across as shade to LeBron James, because every superstar needs to have some help in order to win a championship. That is something I have always understood. So I don't see this video as a way of belittling a superstar just because I'm making a claim that a guy had help. But really what I'm trying to do is remind people to stop disrespecting Kevin Love. At one point, the guy was one of the best players in the entire league, and anyone who was watching him closely in that time could back me up on that. And even in Cleveland, it wasn't like he was garbage. In the 2016 to 2017 season, he averaged about 19 points and 11 rebounds and was an NBA All-Star. And the following season, he averaged nearly 19 points and 9 rebounds and was an All-Star then as well. Again, he just didn't have the role and the opportunities to put up the numbers he once put up in Minnesota. But that doesn't mean that they were fake, and that doesn't mean that he was never the real deal. It just simply means that his individual abilities thrived in one situation more so than another. So what do you guys think? Who is a player who usually takes criticism due to revisionist history? I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comment section below. At the time I'm making this video, only 14 players in NBA history have been honored with a statue outside of their arena. And I mean that very specifically, outside of an NBA arena. These are the 14 players listed on the screen, and they had some of the most impressive NBA careers of all time. Now I will say, there has been NBA players who have got statues in other locations. This might be at colleges, practice facilities, and so on. And these are those players listed on the screen. Now for this video specifically, these ones will not count. We're only looking at the 14 players who got a statue outside of an NBA arena. In order to achieve that honor, a player can't simply be an all-star, a superstar, an NBA champion, or a Hall of Famer. But he's got to have an impact on his franchise that was monumental to that organization, and that will be remembered for decades and decades to come. Today, we're looking at each team within the league, as we go step by step, analyzing who deserves a statue outside of arenas. So let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with my choices. So without further ado, let's get into it. First off, the Philadelphia 76ers. Now they already have a statue of Wilt Chamberlain outside of the arena, and that is a fantastic choice, but I also think they need one for Allen Iverson. The answer was one of the most culturally impactful players of all time, and he is absolutely beloved in the city of Philadelphia. It might be controversial to say that a player who never won an NBA championship deserves a statue, but for Iverson, I think we should make an exception. A couple players who might get suggested is Moses Malone and Joel Embiid, but personally, I would hold off on those for now. Now the Milwaukee Bucks. As things currently stand, they have no statues outside of their arena, which is crazy considering their rich history within the NBA. They absolutely need Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who was for a while the NBA's all-time leading scorer. He went to the finals multiple times with the Bucks. He won several MVPs with the organization, and they won the NBA championship in 1971. Another player who needs a statue is this guy once he retires, and that's Giannis. He won the NBA championship and the finals MVP in 2021, and he's put up some absolutely gaudy numbers on his way to a Hall of Fame career. One player who people might suggest is Oscar Robertson. Although he was great, he did join Milwaukee late, and although he won a championship with the organization, Kareem was clearly the best player at the time. Now the Chicago Bulls. They already have a statue of Michael Jordan, but I think they have to have one of Scottie Pippen. Even Michael Jordan said himself that anytime you mention Michael Jordan, you should mention Scottie Pippen. If that's the case, then why are we not seeing a statue outside of Chicago Stadium of Scottie Pippen alongside of Michael Jordan? He helped the team win 6 NBA championships, and as great as Michael Jordan was before Scottie Pippen showed up, the reality is he didn't win a championship until Scottie Pippen became an All-Star. A couple guys that people would suggest, but I don't think should get one, is Dennis Rodman and Derrick Rose. Rose was incredible, but he never won a championship and he never reached his full potential before the injuries. And as for Dennis Rodman, although he did contribute to the three-peat, he was a role player during that time, and if he had been present for all 6 championships, that would certainly help his case. Now the Cleveland Cavaliers. Obviously, he's not retired yet, but they absolutely need a statue of LeBron James. He transformed that organization and led them to the NBA Finals multiple times. And he led them to their first championship in franchise history in 2016, as they defeated the greatest regular season team of all time. Players that may be considered but I wouldn't give a statue to would be Kyrie Irving and Mark Price. Now for the Boston Celtics. Now what's crazy is they have one of the richest histories of all time, but they actually don't have any statues outside of their stadium, which is mind-blowing when you look at their rivals, the Los Angeles Lakers, who can't stop adding to their collection. There's a lot of guys that you could consider for statues, but personally, I think you gotta start with Bill Russell and Larry Bird. Those two need their statues as soon as possible. After that, you look at Paul Pierce, Kevin McHale, John Havlicek, Dave Cowens, and Sam Jones. But personally, I would start with Russell and Bird. Now the Los Angeles Clippers. They're one of the newer NBA organizations, and it's been a real struggle for them to have any success, as they're yet to win an NBA championship. For this reason, I don't think they should have any statues outside of their building. Some that might be considered is Chris Paul and Blake Griffin, and although they had a great impact on that organization, it was not a statue-level impact. Then you have the Memphis Grizzlies, and it's more of the same. They're simply yet to have anyone who's worthy of a statue. They had guys like Pau Gasol and Marc Gasol, and currently they have Ja Morant, but as things stand today, no one has reached that level. Next is the Atlanta Hawks. And they do have one of the greatest scorers in NBA history and one of my favorite dunkers of all time, Dominique Wilkins. He never won a championship, but he did so much for that organization and made them a consistent Eastern Conference contender despite the fact that he didn't have as much talent as many of his peers. Personally, I think they have to add Bob Pettit, as he's one of the greatest power forwards in NBA history and is one of the most underrated players as well. Some might make the point that he did that for the St. Louis Hawks and not the Atlanta Hawks, but still, he was in a Hawks jersey, and I feel like he deserves to be honored for it. Next is the Miami Heat, and soon they will have Dwayne Wade as their lone statue outside of their stadium. A couple others who would be considered, but I wouldn't quite do it, is LeBron James, Chris Bosh, and Shaquille O'Neal. They had great careers with Miami, and sure, they won championships, but a lot of guys have won championships and don't have statues. And usually, I think you have to be a cornerstone piece for that franchise for many, many years and have the hardware in order to get a statue. And these guys don't exactly meet all those criterias. So I do think Wade should be the only statue outside of their stadium as things currently stand. Next is the Charlotte Hornets. And I simply don't think they've had anyone who's worthy of a statue. Some players they might bring up are Chris Paul, Alonzo Mourning, but without any championships or MVPs, I simply don't see their legacies as statue-worthy. Then you have the Utah Jazz, who already have John Stockton and Karl Malone. and personally, I think that's all they should have at the moment. Some people might consider Pistol Pete Maravich or Adrian Dantley, but I think it would be pushing it for either of those guys. Next is the Sacramento Kings. They simply don't have the most successful history. Some that people might consider, but I don't think are good enough, are Oscar Robertson and Chris Webber. Next is the New York Knicks. Personally, I think Willis Reed and Walt Frazier absolutely need to have a statue outside of Madison Square Garden. These stars helped the Knicks win 2 NBA championships in the 1970s, and specifically in the case of Willis Reed, his famous comeback from an injury is a monumental moment within the Knicks organization. Some that people might suggest, but I don't think make the cut, are Patrick Ewing, Carmelo Anthony, Bernard King, and Dave DeBusschere. Then you have the statue-happy Los Angeles Lakers. They already have George Mikan, Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Jerry West, Elgin Baylor, Kobe Bryant, and Shaquille O'Neal. Now I will say this, because of how many statues the Lakers have outside of Crypto Arena, I think the bar is set a little bit lower for them. So a couple players that I think need a statue are actually James Worthy and LeBron James. James Worthy was the third head of the three-headed monster in the 1980s, which are known as the Showtime Lakers. Big Game James was absolutely pivotal for several of the Lakers' championship teams, and he was even the Finals MVP in 1988, as he had one of the greatest Game 7 performances of all time. The legacy of Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and even the Lakers organization isn't nearly as impressive today if James Worthy was not in a purple and gold jersey during the 1980s. The other guy is LeBron James, and he did lead the Lakers to win an NBA championship in 2020, and he's actually spent quite a few years with the team at this point, and he also became the league's all-time leading scorer while he was wearing a purple and gold jersey. For his contribution, and considering the fact that the Lakers have a lower bar, I do think James should get a statue one day outside of Crypto Arena. Players that might be considered but don't make the cut are Pau Gasol and Anthony Davis. Then we have the Orlando Magic, and personally, seeing that they haven't won a championship banner, and seeing that there haven't been many great players to spend the entirety of their career with that franchise, I don't think they have a statue-worthy player. Some guys that might be considered are Shaquille O'Neal, Penny Hardaway, Dwight Howard, and Tracy McGrady, but I don't think any of them make the cut. Let's take a look at the Dallas Mavericks. They already have Dirk Nowitzki, which was well-deserved. And honestly, I think that's all they need to have at the moment, as there's no other player who led the Mavericks to a championship or spent the entirety of their career there while having a Hall of Fame impact. One player who's probably going to get in, but obviously not yet, is Luka Doncic. Next is the Brooklyn Nets. I don't think any player within this organization has a statue-worthy resume. One that some people might consider, but I don't think makes the cut, is Jason Kidd, as he led his Nets to the NBA Finals multiple times. But without a championship, and given the fact that Jason did play for many different organizations, I do think he misses the cut. Next is the Denver Nuggets. One guy who absolutely needs a statue once he retires is obviously Nikola Jokic. He could retire today and they'd still give him a statue, as he has set numerous NBA records, but more importantly, he led them to their first NBA championship in franchise history. This guy will be fondly remembered forever within Denver. A couple players that might be considered, but I don't think make the cut, are Carmelo Anthony and Alex English. Next is the Indiana Pacers. This might be controversial, but I do think Reggie Miller deserves a statue outside of Indiana Stadium. Listen, Miller was one of the most clutch players in the 1990s, and he did so much to build the popularity of that organization. Many of their most iconic playoff moments are thanks exclusively to Reggie, and although he never won a championship with the team, he did make it to the NBA Finals, and he did spend the entirety of his career in Indiana, which is worth something as well. If a guy like Dominique Wilkins can get a statue in Atlanta, then I don't see why Reggie Miller can't get one in Indiana. Next is the New Orleans Pelicans, and we're not going to hang here very long because simply put, they've never had a player who's anywhere close to a statue-worthy resume. That's not really their fault, as they're a much newer organization. Probably the closest thing they have to that is Anthony Davis, and seeing how he very rarely went deep in the playoffs, he's nowhere close. Next is the Detroit Pistons, and they're kind of a tricky one. I think the one player who definitely deserves a statue is Isaiah Thomas. He was so big for their culture, and at different points, Isaiah Thomas was the leader of a Pistons team that defeated Larry Bird's Celtics, Magic Johnson's Lakers, and Michael Jordan's Bulls. He won back-to-back championships, and if it wasn't for one of the most controversial calls in NBA history, he might have led his team to 3 straight. Some players that might receive consideration, but I don't think make the cut, would be Joe Dumars, Chauncey Billups, and Ben Wallace. I get that 2004 Detroit Pistons team is arguably the greatest defensive team of all time. But with that being said, they won just one championship, and there wasn't really one clear player who stood out amongst the crowd. As Billups was the finals MVP, Richard Hamilton was tremendously impactful, and their best defensive player was easily Ben Wallace. Even guys like Tayshaun Prince and Rasheed Wallace had big impacts as well. So personally, the only guy I would give a statue to is Isaiah Thomas. Next is the Toronto Raptors, and they are one of the most difficult organizations on this entire list. On one hand, Vince Carter had a tremendous impact on that squad, as he was known as Vinsanity, Air Canada, and really put Toronto on the map. With that in mind, he didn't spend his full career there, as Carter kind of turned into a journeyman in the second half of his career. Then you have guys like Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan, and individually, I just don't feel like they're good enough to warrant a statue. Then you have a guy like Kawhi Leonard, who was the best player on that 2019 championship team. But that was the only year he spent with the Raptors. And you can't be giving a guy a statue simply based off of one season. So as many candidates as they have, I don't feel like they have a single guy who makes the cut. Next is the Houston Rockets. And shockingly, they don't have a statue outside of their stadium. The one guy who absolutely needs one is Hakeem Olajuwon. He led his Rockets to back-to-back championships in 1994 and in 1995, and he was even a major part of the Rockets making it to the NBA Finals in 1986. He's one of the greatest defensive players of all time, and some would even argue that he's the greatest two-way player of all time. I think he's the only guy though. Now, some might consider James Harden, Moses Malone, Clyde Drexler, Yao Ming, and Tracy McGrady. But none of those guys won championships with the Rockets, although they were all very talented players individually. Most of those players also spent a significant amount of time in another jersey outside of Houston. Next is the Phoenix Suns, and personally, I don't think they quite have a guy that deserves a statue. I could see an argument for Steve Nash. He gave them some of the most entertaining and fantastic seasons of the organization's history. But with that in mind, they never made it to the NBA Finals a single time, and obviously he never won a championship with the team. He did have back-to-back MVPs, but I don't think that's enough to get a statue. Another guy that might be considered is Charles Barkley, but he didn't have a tremendous amount of years with the organization, and they did fail to win the championship after going to the finals in 1993. Next is the San Antonio Spurs, and I think there's two that absolutely need a trophy, and this might just be a matter of time. First off is obviously Tim Duncan, who's widely recognized as the greatest power forward of all time, and many people have him as a top 10 player or even top 5 player in NBA history. Then another guy is David Robinson, as he won 2 championships with the organization and had the Spurs as a serious Western Conference contender throughout the vast majority of the 1990s. Some of the guys that might get consideration are George Gervin, Kawhi Leonard, Tony Parker, and Manu Ginobili. And maybe I can see arguments for some of those guys, but first off, you gotta get Tim Duncan and David Robinson done before you talk about those other guys. Next is the Portland Trail Blazers. They only have one championship banner within their long history, and that is thanks first and foremost to the all-time great big man, Bill Walton. Walton was one of the most skilled centers in the league's history, but unfortunately, injuries kept him from reaching his full potential. With that being said, they did win the championship in the late 1970s thanks to his impact. I think he's the only guy who's deserving of a statue outside of their building. Some might consider Clyde Drexler or Damian Lillard, but I don't think they made the cut. Then you have the Oklahoma City Thunder. And since they don't really recognize the Seattle Supersonics' history, I think you only have to look at guys like Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook. And although they gave them many years of competitive basketball, and sure, they won plenty of accolades and records along the way, they did start making a lot of trips to different teams in the second half of their career before either of them were able to win a championship. For this reason, I don't think they make a cut, and the Thunder shouldn't have a statue just yet. Then you have the Minnesota Timberwolves, who are statistically the most losing franchise in NBA history. For that reason alone, I don't think they have anyone who's worthy of a statue outside of their building. Maybe there's an argument for Kevin Garnett, as he did his best with a lacking supporting cast and helped them get all the way to the Western Conference Finals. Regardless, they didn't win a championship, and when he did finally get his ring, it was with the Boston Celtics in 2008. Personally, I still think they're waiting for that statue resume, and who knows, maybe it'll come from their current young superstar. Next is the Golden State Warriors. Obviously, once he retires, Steph Curry absolutely has to get a statue outside of their building. He took the Golden State Warriors and changed them from an underdog team to a bandwagon destination. And he did this by being the first unanimous MVP in NBA history, being the greatest shooter of all time, winning 4 championship rings, and being the all-time leader in three-pointers made. Steph is definitely going to get a statue when it's all said and done, but I think joining him should be Klay Thompson. Steph Curry isn't having all that success without Klay, who had some of the greatest playoff performances of all time, and who also has 4 championship rings and many NBA records, like most points scored in a quarter and most three-pointers made. Some guys who might be considered but don't make the cut for me is Draymond Green, Kevin Durant, Wilt Chamberlain, Rick Barry, and Chris Mullin. Many of those guys had Hall of Fame careers, but in the case of Wilt Chamberlain, his most successful seasons from a championship standpoint happened when he wasn't with the Warriors. And with Kevin Durant, he did win 2 championships and 2 finals MVPs, but that was in a short stint with the team, and if you ask me, that was still Steph Curry's team. And the last team on the list is the Washington Wizards, and they currently don't have any statues outside of their building. I think missing by the slightest of margins is Wes Unseld and Elvin Hayes. They did win the NBA championship in 1978, and they did make it to the NBA Finals multiple times. But usually statues are reserved for guys who led their teams to be dynasties and not just a one-time champion. Let me know in the comments, Washington fans, if you disagree, but I think they missed by just the slightest of margins. So now that we've covered all the organizations within the league, what do you guys think? This is a final tally of all of the guys that I think should get statues outside of their arenas. Do you agree with the list? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. So first things first, I gotta give a shout out to Uncut Hoops, who recently made a video on this topic, and I had so many thoughts while he covered it that I had to make a video of my own about it. But definitely go check out his video as well. So the mainstream media has been fueling the hype train for this current USA team, and naturally, a part of that includes comparisons to the 1992 Dream Team. Take a listen to some of the things they've been saying.
Basketball is so much better now than it's ever been. I mean, the game is incredible. Jason Tatum did not start last night. He's better than Scottie Pippen. The 92 Dream Team, Larry Bird was shot. He retired 10 days after the Olympics. You had multiple guys on that team, multiple, who could not handle the ball and who couldn't shoot. Anthony Davis on this team's a much better player than Patrick Ewing. Give me a break. Tatum's much better than Scottie Pippen. LeBron right now is better than Magic was to me at 32 or 33 years old.
1992, Larry Bird was cooked. Magic Johnson had already announced his retirement. So I'm not going to let you all of a sudden be like, oh, back in my day. No.
Well, here's the problem that I have, and no disrespect to the 1992 Olympic team, but half of those guys were a little past their prime.
Okay, so here's the current USA team listed on the screen. And let me make this clear, this team is stacked. Most of these guys can do a multitude of things well, and I really like the way these stars complement each other. The part about all of this that really grinds my gears is how the media lies about the 1992 Dream Team to artificially support their arguments. Let's take a look at some of those aspects. Yes, Larry Bird was not the player he once was, due to his severe back injuries. But sometimes I think that critique is overstated. I definitely wouldn't say that he was, quote, washed. Larry was still effective in his limited time. He was still 7th on that team in minutes and shot 52% from the field. Sure, in hypothetical matchups where he's going up against elite small forwards of other USA teams, he would be a defensive liability because of his health. But that's when the Dream Team would sub in Scottie Pippen, who was a lockdown defensive player to say the least, and who was dangerous in transition on offense. Now the one that frustrates me the most is this one about Magic Johnson. I'm so tired of Magic getting thrown into this narrative of old washed up guys. That was not Magic Johnson at this point. He didn't retire in 1991 because he was old and had nothing left in the tank, but he retired because he had HIV, and that's all there was to it. In the 1991 season, Magic was the runner-up for the league MVP award, and the only reason he didn't win it was because a prime Michael Jordan existed. He had just led his Lakers to the NBA Finals in 1991 without Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Magic put up a fight in those finals even without his two best weapons, James Worthy and Byron Scott, who were missing time due to injuries. In his last game of NBA competition before his retirement, Magic put up a jaw-dropping triple-double of 16 points, 20 assists, and 11 rebounds. And again, those 20 assists were without the help of his two best scoring teammates. Just months before the 1992 Olympics took place, Magic participated in the NBA All-Star Game. And he was incredible out there, looking as if he was in his prime form. He was hitting shots with incredible efficiency, and his speed and playmaking were top-notch, as he was named the All-Star Game MVP with a stat line of 25 points, 9 assists, and 5 rebounds on 75% shooting from the field. That was the guy who was playing for the 92 Dream Team. Not some washed-up has-been, but a guy who was likely the second best basketball player in the world, only behind a prime Michael Jordan. Now let's be real here. The Colin Cowherds and the Nick Wrights of the world probably know all of this, but they mislead audiences on who Magic was at this point simply because it doesn't fit their narrative that they're trying to push. To be honest, I think this whole old redeemed team narrative is a lie, not just about Magic Johnson. Outside of Magic and Larry Bird, not a single player on the Dream Team was above the age of 30. And nearly all of these guys were in the prime of their careers. Not only that, but you really can't talk about the Dream Team and not talk about Charles Barkley. If you go back and you watch Colin Cowherd's rant about how this team is so much better than the Dream Team, you'll see that he doesn't even mention Charles Barkley one time. Barkley was extremely aggressive on offense. He was making shots from all over the court, and he was an absolute nightmare in transition, as he was the most common finisher on the fast breaks. Barkley was the team's leading scorer by far, as he averaged 18 points per game. He was also absurdly efficient, even from three-point range, as he made 7 out of his 8 attempts from that distance. Charles Barkley firmly believes that he was the best player during the 1992 Olympics, and many people, including yours truly, have said that he would have won the MVP of the Olympic Games if that had existed. Beyond that, consider the fact that Stockton and Malone were coming off the bench. The greatest pick and roll duo in NBA history was coming off the bench. Then you look at their shooters. A guy like Chris Mullin never gets any love for being the assassin that he was from three-point range. Over those 8 Olympic Games, he made 14 of his 26 three-point attempts, which is a scorching hot 53.8% from deep. Again, I'm not going to get into all the X's and O's of which team would win. But again, it's just how the mainstream media leaves out so many crucial details. How they don't talk about Mullin, how they don't talk about Barkley, how they say that Bird was completely washed, and they act like Magic was just as washed as well. There's so many things that made that 1992 Dream Team great. And yes, I fully recognize that the rest of the world wasn't as good as the world is now. But still, that doesn't necessarily take away from the talent of the 92 team. And it certainly doesn't make your argument look very strong when you need to omit so much information in order to convince people that you're making a decent argument. So what do you guys think? Is the 1992 Dream Team the greatest USA team of all time? And how do you think this current 2024 team stacks up? I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comment section below. There have been many dominant big men throughout the years, but one player specifically paved the way for the rest of them. Not only was he the first NBA player to lead his team to a three-peat, but he's often recognized as the first superstar of NBA history. George Lawrence Mikan Jr., the Laker legend whose legacy is worth far more than it's acknowledged for. When we break down his era, his skills, achievements, and talent, where does he rank among the greatest centers to ever play the game? Today, I'll try my best to answer that, and we'll start as we always do, by taking it back to the beginning of his career. George Mikan began his professional basketball career when he signed with the Chicago American Gears in 1946. The 6'10 center quickly became the best player on the team and poured in 16.5 points per game over the course of his rookie season. Especially for his era, he was an incredibly skilled big man who had a strong element of finesse to his game. Not only did he quickly establish himself as one of the league's elite scorers, rebounders, and shot blockers, but he was extremely difficult to defend overall. Not just because of his size, but Mikan was well equipped with an ambidextrous hook shot. In that rookie season, Mikan led his Gears to the World Basketball Tournament where he was eventually named the league's MVP. At the end of his rookie campaign, the owner of the American Gears decided to withdraw his team from the NBL with the intent of creating his own league, which would be known as the Professional Basketball League of America, or PBLA for short. Unfortunately, the league folded after just 1 month, which meant that Mikan and all of his teammates randomly had to be distributed to the other 11 remaining teams in the NBL. As a result, Mikan ended up on the Minneapolis Lakers. It's amazing how these things always seem to work out for the Lakers. In his first season with the Lakers, Mikan averaged 21.3 points per game as he led all players in scoring, was named the league MVP, and won the NBL title. The very next season, Mikan led the league in scoring again, and put up a remarkable 28.3 points per game on 41.6% shooting. That shooting percentage has led many younger basketball fans to criticize his efficiency, but context is needed for that field goal percentage. In the early years of basketball, players were still developing fundamentally sound jump shots, and some have even speculated that the older and poorer quality basketballs contributed to the lower percentages. Whether that's true or not, I'm not so sure, but I do know this. In the 1948-49 season, the league average field goal percentage was 32.7%. When Mikan scored his 28.3 points per game on 41.6% shooting, believe it or not, his 41.6% was actually the second best field goal percentage in the entire league that season. Here's something else to consider. Mikan averaged 28.3 points per game at a time where teams were averaging only 80 points per game. If you adjust that ratio to this modern era, then that would translate to nearly 40 points per game. When Mikan was dominating his era, he was easily the best scorer, he was arguably the most efficient player, he was possibly the greatest rebounder, and he was almost certainly the game's best shot blocker as well. Over the course of the 1949 playoffs, he averaged 30.3 points on 45.9% shooting and 80.2% shooting from the free throw line, and it comes as no surprise that his Lakers won the championship yet again. This was only the beginning of his reign though, as Mikan and the Lakers won the championship in 1950 and then won another 3 straight titles from 1952 to 1954. The reason why the NBA only acknowledges some of his stats and championships is because of the different leagues he played in during his early career, from the NBL, the BAA, and eventually the NBA. But the truth is, if you account for each league he played in, then George Mikan won a ridiculous 7 championships in his first 8 seasons as a professional basketball player. And if the Finals MVP had existed during that era, he certainly would have won all 7 of those as well. That kind of winning dominance from a big man has never been matched by anyone other than the great Bill Russell. Mikan was so dominant that he was instrumental in inspiring numerous rules for the NBA, including the goaltending rule, the widening of the 3-second violation lane from 6 feet to 12 feet, and he's even credited as the player who inspired the invention of the shot clock. The biggest example of that inspiration came on November 22, 1950, when Mikan's Lakers had a 29-game home winning streak heading into that evening. The Fort Wayne Pistons were determined to end that streak by any means necessary, so when the game started, the Pistons played a game of keep away whenever they had possession of the ball. This not only disrupted Mikan's dominant offense, but it also resulted in the lowest scoring game in NBA history, where the Pistons snapped the Lakers' streak in a final score of 19-18. George Mikan tried to carry his Lakers as he scored 15 of the Lakers' 18 points, including all 4 of his team's field goals. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough, and just a few years later, the 24-second shot clock was introduced to the NBA. All in all, he was the leader of one of the greatest yet forgotten dynasties of league history. He was a 7-time champion, won 6 consecutive scoring titles, won at least 2 rebounding titles, since rebounds were not tracked until halfway through his career, and he made 6 All-NBA/BAA teams. Despite a full legacy, Mikan only played until the age of 31, and continuous injuries and numerous broken bones resulted in him retiring earlier than most. The man was known as Mr. Basketball and was not only influential in the progress of the league, but he also inspired many that came after him, like the all-time great Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who said, "He showed everyone that a true big man could develop the agility and skills needed to play basketball." Mikan quickly opened their minds. Now, would his game translate to the modern NBA? I'm not so sure, and if I'm being honest, I don't necessarily think that's a fair comparison to make, considering how the league he played in had so many disadvantages, from the training methods to the equipment, technology, and even the lack of training resources compared to the modern NBA players. Mikan certainly had the size and athleticism of a modern big, and he definitely dominated his era just about as much as he possibly could have. If we simply adopt the logic that you can only beat who's in front of you, then Mikan is without question one of the greatest centers of all time, one of the greatest Lakers of all time, and certainly one of the greatest basketball players to ever live. Let me know in the comments section where you rank George Mikan among the greatest players of all time. So it's official. Team USA won the gold medal. And there's one star player specifically who deserves the majority of the credit for that. And it's none other than the greatest shooter in basketball history, Steph Curry. He was absolutely insane in the final 2 games for Team USA as he put up these ridiculous numbers. And especially in the gold medal game, he hit some ridiculously clutch shots, sealing the game with 4 amazing 3-point shots down the stretch. And the final one specifically was iconic and just mesmerizing. It reminded me of Kobe Bryant when he had his shush moment, but in some ways, this was even more impressive when you look at the degree of difficulty of Steph's shots. I've been saying this for a little while now, but the Steph Curry isn't clutch narrative is officially dead at this point. He won the Clutch Player of the Year last season in the NBA, and he was extremely clutch down the stretch in order to win his 4th championship ring. Now, he basically saved Team USA, when France had got it down to just a 1-possession game and had momentum in the contest. All of this has got me thinking about Steph and his legacy. Some of you who follow my channel are gonna remember a video I made a while back, when I compared the legacy of Steph Curry to Magic Johnson. And I said that Magic wasn't even close to Steph Curry when it comes to where they're ranked on the all-time list, and when it comes to what they accomplished on the basketball court. I still hold the position that Magic Johnson is the greatest point guard in basketball history, and I do think Steph's got a little ways to go, but that gap is closing at an alarming rate. Since I made that video, Curry has added to his numbers, he's added to his accolades, and he just won a gold medal where he was the most clutch player involved. One of the major talking points is whether or not Steph Curry should have been the MVP of Team USA. Personally, I do think that would be a little bit much. There has been some instances in basketball history where guys have performed well in the final act and that has earned them the MVP, like James Worthy in 1988. But for myself personally, I think you have to look at the games as a whole. LeBron James was second on the team in scoring, just behind Steph Curry. He led the team overall in rebounding, and by far he led the team in assists, more than double the guy who was in second place. LeBron, he's making leaps and bounds forward in the latter part of his career, as Curry is 36 years old and he'll be turning 37 late next season. Here's another impact that's impressive to me about Steph Curry's legacy. Everybody talks about how he revolutionized the game of basketball with his three-point shooting. He changed the game, he changed the sport. He made it more about pacing and volume of three-point shooting. And for that, you certainly have to recognize his impact. But in my opinion, that is not the most impressive thing about his legacy. What is most impressive to me is what he's done for the Golden State Warriors franchise. Now, older basketball fans can back me up on this, but the Golden State Warriors of today were not the Golden State Warriors before Steph Curry. Before Steph, Golden State rarely made the playoffs, and when they did, it was a really big deal. I remember living in California in the 1990s, and there were far less Warriors fans than Lakers fans. But you had to give respect to the Warriors fans because they were passionate about their club, regardless of the fact that they weren't nearly as successful. In the 2000s, you had the We Believe Warriors, and basically everyone outside of Dallas was rooting for the Warriors when they defeated the Mavericks as a number 8 seed in the playoffs. They were an underdog team that basically everyone wanted to see succeed, but no one took them seriously when it came to title contention, and they were certainly not one of the most valuable franchises in all of basketball. And then Steph Curry happened. He took the Golden State Warriors and made them a destination location. He made them one of the most exciting atmospheres in all of basketball, and he made them must-see TV. In terms of revenue and in terms of popularity, you cannot overstate Steph Curry's impact on the Warriors franchise. He has literally made them the most valuable franchise in all of basketball, ahead of the Knicks, Lakers, and Celtics. I still have a hard time wrapping my mind around that, even though I've known that for a couple years. So with all this being said, from a legacy standpoint, whether you're looking at the game of basketball as a whole, whether you're looking at his individual talent, or whether you're looking at the Warriors franchise, you basically can't overstate Steph Curry's impact and value to this league. Again, Magic Johnson was the face of Showtime, and he dramatically increased the popularity of the Lakers franchise, which was already a very popular franchise. As a 6'9" point guard with his flashy no-look passes and with his transition basketball, Magic saved the NBA from becoming irrelevant alongside of Larry Bird. So from that perspective, both of these all-time great point guards have left an imprint on the league that will last for decades and decades to come. But all I'm saying is that the gap is closing, as Steph Curry is reaching his late 30s and is still capable of being the best player on a championship team. Which now brings me to my next point. I hope Steph's greatness doesn't get wasted in the twilight of his career, because Golden State has been a little bit of a mess the last couple of years, and with Klay Thompson now headed to Dallas, they're basically conceding any chances of them competing for a championship for the next couple of years. Very few players have ever been this great at this age, especially at the point guard position, and again, I would just hate to see it wasted. I hope to see Steph competing for championships again one day, but I don't know if it's going to happen in Golden State. And I would even argue that Steph doesn't owe anything to that franchise, as he took them from a bottom-feeding organization within the league and made them literally the most valuable brand in all of basketball. He transformed that franchise like no one has done since Michael Jordan joined the Chicago Bulls. Ultimately, his legacy is improving by leaps and bounds. And although I still have Magic as the greatest point guard of all time, he definitely should be sweating and looking over his shoulder, because Curry's not done adding to his resume. And if he finds himself in the right situation with the right supporting cast, who knows, he might just add even more hardware to this argument. So what do you guys think? Do you think LeBron James should have been the MVP over Steph Curry? And how do things currently stand in the all-time great point guard comparison between Steph Curry and Magic Johnson? I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comment section below. Honestly, you're going to have a hard time finding any list that doesn't start an all-out war in the comment section below it. I recently found that out with my own list of the greatest players. It had me wondering, what does my own group of viewers think about the greatest players of all time? How controversial would their list be, and would it inspire the same kind of debates? So over the last 37 days, I did 2 polls each day on who should go into the list of the 75. With the list now complete, it's time to share it, and give a bit of my own feedback as well. Starting at 75 is Nate Thurmond, then Dikembe Mutombo, Pau Gasol, Ben Wallace, Manu Ginobili, David Thompson, Tony Parker, Adrian Dantley, Sean Kemp, Artis Gilmore, Nate Archibald, Klay Thompson, Bill Walton, Alex English, James Worthy, and Vince Carter at number 60. No major complaints so far, although there is obviously some things I would change, but that's basically everyone watching this video. It's interesting to see where people rank some of the greatest defensive players of all time, like Ben Wallace and Dikembe Mutombo, because those guys are cracking the list basically only for their play on the defensive end, which means there's some great two-way players who didn't make the list, but Wallace's and Mutombo's defense is apparently good enough to get them over the hump despite being a one-way player. So yeah, it's interesting to see how people factor that in and determine those rankings. So let's continue. 59th is Wes Unseld, then George Mikan, Dennis Rodman, Pete Maravich, Reggie Miller, Bob Cousy, Gary Payton, Tracy McGrady, and Bob McAdoo at number 51. As for myself personally, this is where things got really interesting. I was surprised to see someone like Tracy McGrady ahead of Gary Payton, considering how Gary had a long and healthy career and was a strong force on both ends of the court as well. He won a championship and made it to the NBA Finals several times, unlike McGrady. Peak performance definitely had to have been a big factor for my viewers, because it's not even close if we're considering who's the more accomplished player. I understand that George Mikan played in a different time in the NBA, but his ancient competition isn't enough for me to knock him down this far. I mean, the guy led his team to 7 championships in his first 8 seasons as a pro. That's at least gotta be enough to get you in the top 50, right? Anyway, let's continue. Starting off the top 50 is the Celtics legend Paul Pierce, then Willis Reed, Walt Frazier, Ray Allen, Elvin Hayes, Dwight Howard, Dave Cowens, Dominique Wilkins, Patrick Ewing, and Bob Pettit at 41. I don't really have too many problems with the locations of these players, and I'm very happy to find out that my audience is much smarter than the voters of the 50 greatest in 1997 by including the dynamic Dominique Wilkins in their top 50. Number 40 is George the Iceman Gervin, then Jason Kidd, Kevin McHale, Allen Iverson, Russell Westbrook, Clyde Drexler, Rick Barry, John Stockton, Steve Nash, and Chris Paul. It certainly seems like a hot take to rank Chris Paul ahead of both Steve Nash and John Stockton, but maybe that's just a generational thing for me. Russell Westbrook already being ahead of Iverson is sure to trigger the most loyal Iverson fans, and honestly, I was a little surprised to see that one as well. 30th is John Havlicek, then Scottie Pippen, Charles Barkley, James Harden, the Greek Freak, Elgin Baylor, Kawhi Leonard, Karl Malone, David Robinson, Kevin Garnett, and Isaiah Thomas at 20. I was pleasantly surprised to see that my viewers have Giannis right around the same location that I do, although Kawhi and Harden are much higher than I have them. 19th is Julius Erving, then Dirk Nowitzki, Moses Malone, Dwayne Wade, Oscar Robertson, Jerry West, Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, and Shaquille O'Neal at 11th. One of the most interesting aspects of a 75 greatest list is who you put in the 11th spot. because the truth is, there's 11 players worthy of making the top 10 list. So no matter who gets left out, you're gonna get some backlash. Me and my viewers that voted on Discord agreed that the 11th spot should be the Diesel. Let me know in the comments who's in the 11th spot on your list. Not surprised to see that Steph and Durant are so high on this list. I think it's a little early to have them this high, but I'm pretty sure I'm in the minority on that one. So now, let's get into the best of the very best, the top 10. First off is Bill Russell, then Hakeem Olajuwon, Wilt Chamberlain, Larry Bird, Tim Duncan, Magic Johnson, Kobe Bryant, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, LeBron James, and Michael B. Jordan. The funniest part of this list is how high Kobe Bryant is. Almost nobody's greatest list ranks Kobe this high. And of course, my Kobe-loving community does, so I'm certainly proud of you guys. Wilt being in just the 8th spot proves that I've got more work to do. Expect more of my Wilt propaganda videos in the near future. Part of me also wonders if our Laker bias is showing, in the sense that every major Celtic seems to be ranked lower on this list than most other lists. With that being said, overall, I think most people will like my viewers list more than mine, and I'm totally happy with that. So what do you guys think of the voters list? Anyone specifically who was too high? Let me know in the comments section below. So Anthony Edwards is a modern superstar player, and if you're familiar with this guy, you know that he's one to speak his mind. He usually doesn't beat around the bush and just says what he feels. That's commendable, but every once in a while, you could say something pretty ridiculous with that mindset. People who are watching this video and who are familiar with the situation are probably going to be thinking that I'm going to be pretty mad about this one. The truth is, I'm not. I just think his comment was extremely ignorant, and it seems rather obvious to 90% of basketball fans. But before I go on with my thoughts, let me first explain the situation and what he said. So essentially, he was interviewed by the Wall Street Journal, and this was his quote about old school basketball. I didn't watch it back in the day, so I can't speak on it. Let me interrupt for a second, but he should have stopped right there. And unfortunately, he continues to speak on it, regardless of the fact that he said he couldn't speak on it. They say it was tougher back then than it is now, but I don't think anybody had skill back then. Michael Jordan was the only one who really had skill, you know what I mean? So that's why when they saw Kobe, they were like, oh my god. But now, everybody has skill. So right off the bat, Ant looks like a casual, and is regurgitating a lot of narratives that you see on basketball Twitter. Now before I get into the meat and potatoes of his actual comment, let me first point out that I think this was a terrible PR move. Anthony Edwards doesn't just have a lot of young NBA fans, but he's kind of been the recent poster child for a lot of old school fans as well. For one, he famously made the comments that he believes guys shouldn't be load managing, and that whenever he's capable to go out there and play, he's going to go out there and play. Immediately, that won points with old school basketball fans. Then he's a guy who speaks his mind, he plays through injuries, he does a lot of trash talking, and he has a really old school mindset. He has a swagger and energy, and even mannerisms that seem similar to a young Michael Jordan. Some MJ fans will get really upset by those comments, because yes, I acknowledge he isn't nearly on the level of a young Michael Jordan. But with that being said, there are still some similarities with their personalities and with their character. Because of this, I've witnessed on my own basketball channel how he's been embraced by old school basketball fans. And now, he's basically spitting in the face of those old school fans. If Edwards is going to be saying that Michael Jordan was the only skilled player back in the day, think about the guys that MJ was competing against. Apparently, Magic Johnson wasn't skilled. Apparently, Larry Bird wasn't skilled. Or how about Hakeem Olajuwon, one of the most fluid, artistic big men that the game of basketball has ever seen. Then you get into the latter half of MJ's career. His career did overlap with guys like Allen Iverson, Kobe Bryant, and Tracy McGrady. Anthony Edwards is literally saying that those guys don't have skill. Like, what are we doing here? Some people are going to say that you should always take the opinion of the basketball player over the YouTuber or the analyst or the guy who's never played professionally. But when this is the opinion, seriously? So then people in my comment section are going to start asking, If his comments are so ridiculous, then why do you even bother acknowledging them? And my answer to that is, well, because history is important, and people buy into propaganda when it's left unchecked. 20 years ago, people generally weren't making the plumber's argument in basketball discourse, but now it's one of the most common talking points in the community. This is what happens when a narrative gains momentum and people who know the truth are not calling it out. Young people are susceptible and impressionable, especially when a narrative is being preached by someone that they consider as a hero. Overall, I still really like Anthony Edwards as a basketball player, but man, these are some comments that are going to really alienate a large demographic of basketball fans. And if we're being completely honest, it's just simply not true. Like, not even close. It would be one thing if he said this modern era is more skilled than past eras. I could see that argument, and most basketball fans might even agree. But that's not what he said. He said no one other than MJ was skilled. Even MJ himself has admitted that his skills and game did not originate with his own imagination. He pulled much of that from David Thompson, who was the guy who introduced him into the Hall of Fame. Listen, I realize at this point I'm going up against millions and millions of people that have now have this narratives and these thought process permeating their basketball discourse. But I'm just tired of it, man. I get to a certain extent that young basketball fans are saying this because a lot of old heads have been taking a dump on current NBA players. So I get that. But whatever happened to just appreciating greatness? What happened to being grateful to the guys who came before you? And being grateful for the guys who carried the torch after you. In a way, sustaining your legacy by keeping the game relevant. Both the old school basketball players and the new basketball players need to have a healthy appreciation of one another, and the same can be said for basketball fans. From that perspective, this whole situation is just really frustrating, because what's happening as a result is we're having less genuine basketball conversations. I appreciate any basketball channel, any basketball analyst, or any basketball fan that can try to remove some of those biases and just have genuine, authentic, analytical basketball conversations. But now you got guys saying things like, well, I didn't watch, but I know the quality was bad because reasons. That makes no sense whatsoever. These narratives and these talking points have really been inspiring me lately. And I really just want to start comparing eras, not to prove which one's better, but really to make the point that the gap in athleticism and skill is not really as big as a lot of people think. It's one thing to say that players weren't that athletic or weren't that skilled in the 1990s. But then I'd ask Anthony Edwards, could you even name 30 players from the 1990s? And honestly, I think he'd probably struggle to do it. Of course, as the years go on, the talent pool is going to seem less and less as younger fans become more unfamiliar with players from generations past. Let me give you an example. Think of a guy like Derrick Jones Jr. He can jump through the roof and he's one of the most athletic players that I've ever seen. But 30 years from now, no one will be talking about this guy. He doesn't have hardware, he doesn't have impressive stats, he doesn't have records, he was never a superstar. He's just not going to be remembered. It might sound harsh, but that's the reality of basketball fandom. Sure, you might remember him when you're 60 years old, but then you're going to watch basketball discourse being controlled by a bunch of people in their teens, in their 20s, and in their 30s. And they'll have no idea who that guy is, therefore they'll act like he never existed, and they'll start taking a crap on your era. Ultimately, this is just a little bit of a rant on my part. Again, I'm not really upset about what Edwards said, because I think 90% of basketball fans in general are going to realize that he's being a little bit dramatic. A lot of young fans think that players weren't that skilled back in the day, but to say that Jordan was the only skilled player is pretty ridiculous. Still, regardless, there is a lack of appreciation, respect, and knowledge for past basketball eras. And a lot of the time, some of those guys bring it upon themselves by constantly dumping on the talent of today's modern players. As much as I love him, take a guy like Shaq as an example. In the last few years, it's become incredibly popular to talk about times where a player was offended and then he went out and did something remarkable on the court in response. Two of the most obvious players you hear this frequently about are Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. With that being said, players have been taking things personally and using it as motivation, going all the way back to the early days of the league. Today, I have a story about the greatest winner in NBA history, in an instance where he took something personally and went out and achieved history in response. Now, as most of us all know, Bill Russell has more rings than fingers, as he won 11 championships throughout his NBA career. His Celtics dominated the 1960s like no team has ever dominated the league before or since. At one point, Boston had won 8 consecutive NBA titles, as they became the model of excellence within the game of basketball. It's easy to simply look upon that great success on a surface level, and just assume that the Celtics steamrolled the league as juggernauts and were never considered as underdogs during that winning era. But that's actually not the case at all. We pick up our story at the end of the 1967-68 season. It's the NBA Finals between Bill Russell and the Boston Celtics, and Jerry West and Elgin Baylor of the Los Angeles Lakers. Since Bill Russell was drafted, this was the 6th time that the Lakers and Celtics met up in the NBA Finals, and each and every one of those times, the Celtics had won the championship. Boston had an absolute stranglehold on this series, but that didn't mean that it didn't feel like the tides were changing. Although there was a gap between the Celtics and Lakers, the gap was closing, and it was closing fast. Bill Russell was just reaching his mid-30s, and the rumors of his eventual retirement were now fully underway. On the other hand, the Lakers were a much younger team, and their best player, Jerry West, was just reaching the prime of his career. After years of crushing the regular season, regularly finishing around 60 wins, Boston had slowed down a bit, and in the 1967-68 regular season, they finished with a 54-28 record, which was only slightly better than the Lakers' 52-30 record. Heading into the 1968 NBA Finals, people were expecting this matchup to be far more competitive than it typically was, and that's exactly what happened. Bill Russell and the Celtics eventually went on to beat these Lakers in 6 games. But it wasn't an easy 6-game series, as the average margin of victory was only 1.5 points per game. As optimistic as the Lakers felt heading into that postseason, they ultimately left the 68 Finals hanging their heads in failure, as they were now 0-6 against Bill Russell's Celtics. With that being said, their confidence would be restored in that upcoming offseason, and in a powerful way. On July 9th, 1968, the Lakers achieved one of the greatest and most lopsided trades in NBA history. The Lakers had acquired Wilt Chamberlain from the Philadelphia 76ers in exchange for Darrell Imhoff, Archie Clark, and Jerry Chambers. What Los Angeles was adding to their already powerful roster was a superstar center who had just led his team to a championship in 1967. Now the Lakers had star power that absolutely no one could match on paper. Jerry West and Elgin Baylor were each annual MVP contenders, and Wilt Chamberlain was simply the most statistically dominant player in the history of the game. This was the first time in basketball history that a team was widely being referred to as a super team. The Lakers had already believed that they were preparing to take the torch from the Celtics, but now they believed they were going to do it with overwhelming force. In the media, the narrative was that the age of the Celtics was over, the time of the Lakers had come. The hype was intense, as Los Angeles packed out their first preseason game with an attendance of 12,443 fans, which at the time was the largest basketball crowd that the city of Los Angeles had ever seen. Energized by their new superstar and by their resurrected confidence, the Lakers dominated the regular season, finishing with the best record in the Western Conference. On the other hand, the Boston Celtics were beginning to show their age, and were struggling to a greater extent than they were accustomed to. They finished the regular season with only a 48-34 record, which was the only time during the decade that they finished below 50 wins. At this point in basketball history, only 8 teams made it to the NBA playoffs, which means that these 4th-seeded Celtics barely made the cut. Heading into these playoffs, it appeared to be clear to everyone that these super team Lakers were the team to beat. Despite their mediocre regular season showing, the Celtics hit the switch in the playoffs, tapping into their experience and maturity as they defeated the 55-win 76ers in 5 games, and then they defeated the 54-win Knicks in 6 games. This set up yet another epic finals matchup between the historic rivals, the Lakers and the Celtics. Now before this, the Lakers and Celtics had met up 6 times in the regular season, and the Lakers won 4 out of those 6 matchups, with the last victory for Los Angeles being a 35-point beatdown in Boston Garden, which took place roughly a week before the playoffs were set to begin. So not only did the Lakers have a better record, and not only were they clearly the more talented team on paper, but they had also been abusing the Celtics all season long. All signs were pointing to this year being a coronation for LA. Of course, some people believe the Celtics would find a way to win yet again, because that's what they always seem to do. But all conventional evidence was pointing to the rise of a new power in the league. When the finals began, things proceeded to go exactly as expected, as the Lakers' Big Three dominated Game 1, scoring 92 points combined between their three-headed monster. After 2 games, the Lakers were in a commanding position, leading the series 2-0. With that being said, Bill Russell and John Havlicek always performed with elite desperation when their backs were against the wall. At the end of Game 6, Boston had successfully done the unthinkable and forced an improbable Game 7 in Los Angeles. Now here's the thing. Heading into Game 7, 3 games had been played in Los Angeles, and 3 games had been played in Boston. The Lakers had won all 3 games in LA, while the Celtics won all 3 games in Boston. With Game 7 being held in the Forum in Los Angeles, the Lakers had every reason to be extremely confident that they were going to win the championship and finally put an end to the Celtics' reign over the league. The one person who led that confident charge for the Lakers organization was the Lakers owner, Jack Kent Cooke. With supreme conviction that his team was going to win Game 7, Jack made celebration plans for as soon as the Lakers hypothetically won the game, and he made these plans public to everyone. Jack made sure that a flyer was placed on each and every spectator's seat prior to the game, and on the flyer it said, "When, not if, the Lakers win the title, balloons will be released from the rafters, the USC marching band will play Happy Days Are Here again, and broadcaster Chick Hearn will interview Elgin Baylor, Jerry West, and Wilt Chamberlain in that order." Now these balloons were being held in the rafters with a giant net, and printed onto each of these balloons was the words "World Champion Lakers." These balloons could be seen easily by everyone on the basketball court. Before tip-off, word reached the Celtics locker room about the Lakers' arrogant celebration plans. And obviously, as competitors, the Celtics players were extremely infuriated, and none of them were more angry than the Celtics leader, Bill Russell. During the pre-game shoot-around, the Celtics could see the balloons as they were practicing. Soon afterwards, the star players met up at center court, which is customary prior to the start of a championship game. When Jerry West and Bill Russell came face to face with one another, Russell looked directly at him and said, "Those f***ing balloons are staying up there." The challenge had been made and the table was set. Tip-off took place, and what ensued was one of the greatest games in the history of the NBA. Jerry West did his part, putting up a 40-point triple-double. Wilt Chamberlain also showed up with a monstrous effort, but an untimely injury forced him to miss the final minutes of an extremely close contest. Although the Celtics were up by as many as 17 points in the fourth quarter, Los Angeles stormed back to make the game a nail-biter in the final minutes. But that's when Bill Russell came through and fulfilled his promise. On the night, Russell had 6 points, 21 rebounds, and 6 assists. He led all Celtics players in minutes, rebounds, assists, and presumably blocks, as his key rebounds and defensive stops were the major difference maker down the stretch. When the buzzer sounded, the Celtics had done it yet again, as they defeated the Lakers for the 7th time in the NBA Finals. Bill Russell now had 11 championship rings, and this victory made him 10-0 in deciding 7th games. And, of course, those balloons did in fact stay up there. If there's one thing to learn from this video, is that you never, ever bet against Bill Russell in the NBA Finals. especially in a Game 7, regardless of the opposition and regardless of the odds. So what do you guys think? What's your favorite story about a player taking something personally? John was known for several things throughout his legendary career. He was a leader, a workhorse with incredible stamina, and he was one of the most clutch performers the NBA has ever seen. Whenever the Celtics needed a big game or a big play, John was often the man who provided it for them. He was drafted out of Ohio State University in the 1962 NBA draft. When John was drafted by the Boston Celtics, he was known mainly as a defensive player from his college days. But now, he was playing with the very talented Boston Celtics. With Boston loaded with stars, very often the defense would sag off on John, daring him to shoot the ball. His legendary head coach, Red Auerbach, told him that he shouldn't let the defense disrespect him like that, and that Havlicek needed to be more aggressive offensively. This bit of advice completely changed his career, to say the least. Not only did he look to score more, but he became one of the best scorers the NBA had to offer, and currently has the 7th most shot attempts in NBA history. He was a 13-time All-Star with 11 All-NBA selections, and he was the 1974 Finals MVP. He was a scoring wing player with a smooth jump shot, and he was a tenacious and scrappy defender who often forced his opponent into turnovers, none more famous than in Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals between his Celtics and Wilt Chamberlain's 76ers. With a game and a trip to the NBA Finals on the line, Hal Greer was inbounding the ball. The Celtics were leading by 1 point when John Havlicek made one of the most famous defensive plays in NBA history. He anticipated the pass and stole the ball, sending the Celtics to the finals where they would go on to win one of his astonishing 8 NBA championships. People frequently talk about Michael Jordan's undefeated 6-0 NBA Finals record, but there are actually 3 players in league history who have an even greater finals record than Jordan, and one of them is John Havlicek, who finished with an 8-0 record. He was the Finals MVP in 1974 with a stat line of 26.4 points, 7.7 rebounds, 4.7 assists, and 1.9 steals on 42.9% shooting. The thing is, yes, Havlicek was the Finals MVP in 1974, but that was one of the few championship seasons where the Finals MVP actually existed and was available to him. If the award had always existed throughout his career, he would definitely have multiple Finals MVPs to his name, with the 1968 Finals and the 1969 Finals being 2 of his standout performances. Bill Russell is obviously remembered as the leader and the iconic cornerstone of the Celtics dynasty, as he should be, but it is worth acknowledging that Russell had the luxury of leading upon his teammates offensively, while he focused more on what he was best at, defense and rebounding. One of those players he leaned upon heavily was Havlicek, who at one point led his loaded Celtics in scoring for 6 consecutive seasons. On top of all of this, he was also one of the elite wing defenders of league history with his 8 all-defense teams. But that stat only tells one portion of the story. In his first 11 seasons in the NBA, the league wasn't tracking any blocks or steals, which kept him from ranking high on the all-time lists. The Defensive Player of the Year award also didn't exist until years after he retired. So as impressive as his career resume is, in reality, it should be recognized as significantly better. He played 16 reliable seasons with the Celtics and never once played less than 70 games in a season. For his career, he averaged 20.8 points, 6.3 rebounds, and 4.8 assists per game. But during his prime season, he was averaging nearly a triple-double of 29 points, 9 rebounds, and over 7 assists, while playing a remarkable 45 minutes per game. Outside of Bill Russell, you could argue that no other player was more pivotal to the Celtics' success in the 60s and 70s than John Havlicek. He's still the Boston Celtics all-time leader in points and field goals made. He's second in assists and 5th in rebounds. He's ranked 4th all-time behind Kobe Bryant, Dirk Nowitzki, and Tim Duncan in points scored by a player who spent his entire career with one franchise. Havlicek was one of 10 players in NBA history to make at least 8 All-NBA teams and 8 All-Defensive teams. The other 9 are Tim Duncan, Kobe Bryant, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Hakeem Olajuwon, Michael Jordan, David Robinson, Kevin Garnett, Gary Payton, and Chris Paul. That's some pretty legendary company. On top of all of this, John was known as a wonderful teammate and human being. In a statement released by the Celtics organization shortly after his passing, they said, "His defining traits as a player were his relentless hustle and wholehearted commitment to team over self. He was extraordinarily thoughtful and generous, both on a personal level and for those in need, as illustrated by his commitment to raising money for the Genesis Foundation for Children for over 3 decades through his fishing tournament. John was kind, considerate, humble, and gracious. He was a champion in every sense. John Hondo Havlicek will be remembered in NBA history as a terrific ambassador of the game and as the quintessential Boston Celtic." Heading into the summer of 2004, the Lakers were coming off of a tumultuous season that had championship expectations, yet ended in defeat on the game's biggest stage. Shaq and Kobe's personal beef had grown sour to the point of no return, and with the diesel aging, the front office found themselves in a position where they had to choose one star or the other. Ultimately, they traded the 32-year-old Shaquille O'Neal to the Miami Heat, while Kobe was signed to a 7-year, $136 million contract. Former All-Stars like Karl Malone and Gary Payton also left Los Angeles, which meant that Kobe was left with a roster with below-average talent. The newly acquired Lamar Odom was the best supporting piece that the Mamba had, and many writers and analysts in Los Angeles were saying that Odom was going to be the Scottie Pippen to Kobe's Michael Jordan. Obviously, those were shoes way too big for him to fill, and the Lakers would struggle out of the gates. Former NBA champion head coach Rudy Tomjanovich was hired to be the replacement head coach of Phil Jackson, and was given a 5-year, $30 million contract. He barely saw any of that time though, as Rudy decided to resign from the team only 43 games into the season due to his mental and physical exhaustion. Los Angeles was decent with Rudy as they started the year with a 24-19 record, but they absolutely imploded after he left, as they closed out the rest of the season with a 10-29 record, falling well short of the playoff picture. Kobe clearly didn't have the help he needed, and Los Angeles finished as one of the worst teams defensively. Regardless of the subpar supporting cast, the narrative was now firmly established among the media that Kobe could never win a championship ring without Shaquille O'Neal. Over the next 2 seasons, Kobe started making history on an individual level, as he dropped 81 points in a game against the Raptors, 62 points in 3 quarters versus the Mavericks, and 4 straight 50-point games. The thing is, the supporting cast was still awful, as below-average players like Chris Mim, Kwame Brown, Luke Walton, and Smush Parker were consistently in the starting rotation. Regardless of the lack of legitimate support, Kobe's MVP caliber performances willed the Lakers to the playoffs in back-to-back seasons, but in both years, they were eliminated out of the first round by the Phoenix Suns. This was an extremely rare low moment for the Lakers franchise, as their season ended in the first round or worse 3 years in a row. Kobe was beyond frustrated and was extremely critical of not only his teammates, but of the Lakers' upper management. He was completely done carrying the organization on his back, so Bryant then decided to publicly demand a trade. The narrative that he couldn't win without Shaq was now more prominent than ever before, and even Los Angeles locals like Bill Plaschke from the LA Times was preaching this narrative as well.
Bill, have the Lakers reached a point of no return with Kobe Bryant?
Well, let's see. He's ripped the general manager. He's ripped the owner. He's ripped other players. He's basically ripped the city by saying he don't want to play here. I think they've reached a point of no return. Hello, Lakers, trade him now. It's beyond the point of no return. How much abuse can they take from one guy? And at what point does his value on the court be offset by how much a huge attraction he is off the court, and the fact that even on the court they can't win with him? They've already shown it. They cannot win with him. He doesn't make players around him better. Trade him now. Maybe have a chance to rebuild. The Lakers are about winning. They've never been about selfishness. They've never been about one person. They've always been about a team, about winning. Get rid of him now because you can't win with him.
Fortunately for LA fans, the Lakers management didn't take Bill's advice and decided to keep the Mamba against his will. Regardless, a lot of Laker fans were actually on Plaschke's side and was sick of Bryant's drama and displeasure with the organization. So when the Lakers' 07-08 season finally began, the fans let Kobe hear it, and Staples Center was booing Kobe during player introductions. I repeat, the Staples Center crowd in Los Angeles was booing their own superstar, Kobe Bryant, who had helped them win 3 championships up to that point. Kobe went on to score 45 points in that game, but the Lakers still lost to Houston, which basically continued the theme of the previous 3 seasons. The once prestigious Lakers organization was now being seen as a joke of a franchise, as everyone on the team now seemed at odds with each other, and even the fans were at odds with the superstar that they paid to watch. Even though management decided to keep Kobe for now, it only seemed as if it was a matter of time before the Mamba left in free agency when his contract eventually expired. Nearly every glimmer of hope within the Lakers organization was immediately dashed to pieces, and another example of this was their young emerging center Andrew Bynum, who suffered a season-ending knee injury against the Grizzlies just 35 games into the year. It appeared as if another depressing conclusion to the season was approaching. Through all the constant tension and drama in Los Angeles, the Lakers managed to start the year with a 29-16 record, good enough for the 5th seed in the Western Conference. Regardless of the fact that they were destined for the playoffs, the feeling among basketball circles remained the same, that Kobe and the Lakers were on their way to an early playoff exit, and the trade demands would heat up yet again. This is when the move finally happened that changed the course of Bryant's career, the Lakers' future, and the history of basketball. Jerry West and Mitch Kupchak of the Lakers front office achieved one of the greatest midseason basketball trades of all time. The Lakers acquired the all-star big man Pau Gasol from the Memphis Grizzlies in exchange for Kwame Brown, Javaris Crittenton, Aaron McKie, and the draft rights to Marc Gasol. This move sent shockwaves throughout the league, as the Lakers went instantly from an expected first-round exit to a contender in the Western Conference. Many people believed this acquisition would lead to great things for Los Angeles, but before everyone was convinced, Gasol had to be seen on the floor with the rest of his new squad. The first impression was about as strong as it could have been. On February 5, 2008, Gasol made his Laker debut in a matchup against the New Jersey Nets. He completely controlled the game with 24 points, 12 rebounds, and 4 assists on 67% shooting. The play on the court was beautiful to witness, as the Lakers veterans gelled together as if they had been teammates for years. But on an individual level, Kobe had a horrible game, as he was dealing with an injured finger and only scored 6 points on 3 of 13 shooting from the field and 7 turnovers. You wouldn't know it though if I hadn't told you, as the Lakers won the game comfortably 105-90. Nobody was happier with the outcome and the state of the team than the player who struggled the most, Kobe Bryant. In the post-game interview, Bryant was asked about his thoughts on his new co-star, and this is what he had to say.
Kobe, how nice a feeling is it to know that you can score 6 points and still have a victory come out?
You have no idea. Just make the game so much easier. We had some weapons before. Now we just added a huge one to the team, and we get Big Bynum back. There's a God. There is a God.
Kobe proclaiming that there is indeed a God indicates that he understood the magnitude of the acquisition. The energy completely changed around the Lakers organization overnight, as the feeling of impending despair shifted to hope and optimism. Obviously, Kobe's stance on his trade request was revisited after Pau was in LA, and when asked if the Gasol acquisition strengthened his desire to stay in LA, Kobe responded with a smirk on his face, saying this.
It doesn't hurt. Absolutely not.
To say that Pau was pivotal to the Lakers' success from that point on would be a massive understatement. Even though Gasol was naturally a power forward, he filled the role of the injured Andrew Bynum at the center position throughout the 2008 season. Ultimately, the Lakers lost the 2008 NBA Finals in 6 games to the Boston Celtics, but Gasol would only continue to be an anchor for the team for their next 2 seasons. In the 2008-09 season, Andrew Bynum once again went down with a devastating knee injury, which again moved Gasol to the center position for the majority of the season. In that postseason, Pau averaged 18 points and 11 rebounds on a remarkably efficient 58% shooting from the field. Next year's playoffs was more of the same, and in the NBA Finals matchup against the Boston Celtics, Pau led all players in rebounds and blocks and was second overall in scoring. In the hard-fought 7th game, Gasol dropped 19 points, 18 rebounds, and 4 assists. Not only was he crucial to winning that decisive game, but many people think he deserved the Finals MVP for his contribution in that series. Thanks to his efforts, the Lakers won the NBA championship in back-to-back seasons. Simply put, if it wasn't for Gasol, Kobe doesn't have any rings without Shaq, forever tarnishing his legacy. If it wasn't for Gasol, the Lakers likely never get out of that awful post-Shaq era, which would have been a huge hit to the Lakers' brand and reputation. This is why the Lakers retired his jersey, because he saved the franchise from the dark depths of mediocrity and restored the team to the glory that they've become so accustomed to. So now it's your turn. What would Kobe's legacy be, and how would the Lakers be viewed today if Gasol never arrived in Los Angeles? Let me know in the comment section below. So as many of you know, I'm currently working on my 200 questions video, where I'm answering 200 questions from my audience as a thank you for 200,000 subscribers, which we're quickly closing in on. But every once in a while, I get a question that requires such an in-depth answer that it would simply take too long to put it in the 200 questions video, and instead needs a video of its own. That's where this one comes in, as a faithful viewer asked, if I was to make the perfect basketball player using a combination of attributes from NBA players, what would those attributes be? Who would be the players involved? There is also one rule to this question, and it's that I can't use one player multiple times. For example, if I was to use the footwork of Michael Jordan, I couldn't also use the fadeaway jumper of Michael Jordan. Once that player has one of his attributes used, he's done. So with that in mind, I tried to be as insanely specific as possible, as I got into the nitty-gritty details of what my player would be like. Essentially, I'm just going to list these off. And this might seem like a stupid video to you guys, but honestly, I wanted to do right by my viewer and tackle this super hypothetical scenario and see where you guys agree or disagree. First off, he would have the height of George Marason, who is recorded as the tallest NBA player of all time, standing at 7 foot 7 inches tall. He would have the hand size of Boban Marjanovic, who is on record to have the largest hands in NBA history. He would have the wingspan of Manute Bol, who apparently has a wingspan of 8 feet 6 inches long. He would have the agility of Victor Wembanyama, who is the most fluid and free-flowing big man that I've ever seen within this league. He would have the strength of Ben Wallace, who is widely known as one of the strongest players in NBA history. He would have the speed of Derrick Rose, as he was absurdly fast and one of the most explosive players of all time. He would have the stamina of Wilt Chamberlain, who during his prime literally played 48 minutes per game. Then he would have the bullying nature of Shaquille O'Neal, who was bigger and stronger than everyone else, but was not hesitant about punishing smaller defenders. He would have the motor of Russell Westbrook, who was always playing with 100% effort throughout the entirety of the game while seemingly never running out of energy. He would have the tenacity of Kevin Garnett, as he was visibly one of the all-time competitive players. He would have the basketball IQ of Chris Paul, who was one of the most intelligent playmakers of all time. He would have the leaping ability of Vince Carter, who famously jumped over a 7-footer in the Olympics and is widely recognized as the greatest dunker in NBA history. He would have the dunking ferocity of Shawn Kemp, as I've never seen anyone who dunked the ball harder than him. He would have the limitless range of Steph Curry, as there is nowhere on the court where Steph isn't considered open. He would have the off-ball movement of Reggie Miller, as he was the epitome of aggressive at finding a spot to catch and shoot. He would have the spot-up shooting ability of Ray Allen, who was arguably the greatest set shooter of all time. He would have the general ball handling of Kyrie Irving, the crossover dribble of Allen Iverson, the ball faking of Rajon Rondo, and the Euro step of Manu Ginobili. He would have the layup package of Rod Strickland, the teardrop of Tony Parker, and the step back of James Harden. Along with that, He would also have the fadeaway jumper of Dirk Nowitzki, which was nearly impossible to contest. He would have the interior footwork of Akeem Olajuwon and the perimeter footwork of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. He would have the defensive versatility of Dennis Rodman, as he could guard all 5 positions at any point in time. He would have the on-ball defense of Scottie Pippen, and the rim protection of Dikembe Mutombo. The chase-down blocking ability would be from the Secretary of Defense, Bobby Jones. He would be equipped with the quick hands of Alvin Robertson, the passing lane instincts of Clyde Drexler, the offensive rebounding of Moses Malone, and the defensive rebounding of Dwight Howard. The court vision would come from none other than Magic Johnson. The outlet passing would be from Nikola Jokic, the lob passing of Brian Shaw, the inbounds passing of Jason Kidd, and the creativity of White Chocolate Jason Williams. He would have the bank shot of Tim Duncan, the skyhook shot of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the finger roll of George the Iceman Gervin, and the pull-up mid-range jumper of Jerry West. He would have the free throw efficiency of Steve Nash, the trick shooting of Luka Doncic, and the flair of Dr. J. Julius Erving. And now, I saved some of the most crucial attributes for the very end. He would have the leadership of Bill Russell, who famously led his Boston Celtics to win 11 NBA championships, not just as a player, but as a head coach. He would have the wisdom of Phil Jackson, who knew exactly how to lead a team, how to push buttons, and how to manage a variety of egos. He would have the unselfishness of Jack Twyman, who was the ultimate teammate and was always looking out for his fellow man. Look into his story with Maurice Stokes if you want to know more about what I'm talking about. He would have the trash-talking ability of Gary Payton, who was frequently getting in the offensive player's head. He would have the sound decision-making of John Stockton, who had the greatest assist-to-turnover ratio in NBA history thanks to his intelligent play. He would have the work ethic of Kobe Bryant, as I simply think there's never been a harder working athlete in modern history. He would have the confidence of Anthony Edwards, the longevity of LeBron James, and the availability of AC Green. He would have the toughness of Larry Bird, who was willing to play through anything. He would have the big game clutch gene of Michael Jordan, who always shined brightest when it mattered the most. And he would have the clutch shot making of Robert Horry, as he almost always buried the shot when the team needed it the most. So now you've heard my ridiculously long list of attributes to make the perfect basketball player. What were some of the attributes I missed? What were some of the attributes that you would actually give to someone else? Or maybe I used the wrong kind of attribute on a certain player.
Russell wasn't just a legend on the court, but off of it as well, as he was seen as a respected and larger-than-life personality who surely left a lasting impact on the generations after him. Many content creators have honored Bill with videos that cover the story of his life and legacy. I thought I would honor him by providing information that you may have not heard before. Here's numerous facts about the career of Bill Russell. One of Russell's greatest friends, and throughout his career one of his greatest rivals, was the legendary center Wilt Chamberlain. Wilt and Bill had a legendary rivalry for the ages, as the Giants clashed on a regular basis, as they both attempted to assert their dominance over the league. One of the reasons their rivalry is so legendary is because of how many times these two competitors battled it out. Some of the other greatest rivalries of NBA history would be Magic Johnson versus Larry Bird, Michael Jordan versus Isaiah Thomas, Shaquille O'Neal versus Kobe Bryant, and Kevin Durant versus Russell Westbrook. But what's crazy is that all of these other great rivalries combined still don't have as many games played against each other as Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain had by themselves, as the two battled it out a total of 143 times throughout their careers. Bill was never known to be an explosive scorer, but he did impact the game in numerous other ways, primarily with his rebounding, defense, and passing. With that being said, in the history of the league, there have only been 9 times where a player has averaged less than 20 points per game and still won the league MVP. Astonishingly, Bill Russell has 5 of those specific MVPs, which is more than the rest of league history altogether. Speaking of Bill's non-offensive impact, many people often consider him as the greatest defensive player to ever live. But unfortunately, many of our modern-day defensive statistics didn't exist during his career. But one of the ones we do have are his defensive win shares. He didn't just dominate this stat, but based on how much he owned it, the stat might as well be named after him. Bill played a total of 13 seasons in the NBA, and incredibly, he led the league in defensive win shares in 11 of those seasons. Second place on the all-time list doesn't even have half as many seasons as Russell did, which was George Mikan and Tim Duncan, who led the league 5 times apiece. Right behind John Havlicek is Paul Pierce for the most points ever scored by a Boston Celtic. Pierce was known as the truth and could score a ton of buckets in a small amount of time. With his lethal shooting, Pierce made a name for himself in the NBA playoffs with his many high-scoring affairs. With that being said, remarkably, Bill Russell has more games in the playoffs with at least 30 rebounds than Paul Pierce does with at least 30 points. Bill Russell was a winner, we all know this, but he wasn't simply a winner based on his luck and circumstances. The main reason he was so successful is because he was arguably the most clutch basketball player to ever live. Russell played in a total of 10 deciding Game 7s throughout the course of his career, and he never lost a single one of them. He was leaned upon heavily in those games as he played 488 out of a possible 495 minutes. If Bill isn't dominating without taking almost any rest, then they likely lose some of those Game 7s, as 6 out of those 10 games were decided by only one possession. The reality was that if Russell had an off night in any one of those Game 7s, then he's losing a championship ring because of it. But instead, we now remember him as the legend who has more rings than fingers. Nikola Jokic and Wilt Chamberlain are often recognized as the greatest passing big men of NBA history, which is warranted, but often overlooked in that aspect is Bill Russell, whose court vision and unselfish nature allowed him to be one of the all-time great givers as well. Russell actually has the 3rd highest career assists per game average among centers in NBA history, reaching as high as 5.8 in 1967. Bill had many modern players that he developed a close relationship with, and he had a high level of respect for many of those players. But there was only one player who Russell referred to as his absolute favorite, and that was the San Antonio Spurs legend, Tim Duncan. The statement from Bill came from a discussion with Duncan many years ago, and he equated his fondness to their similarities and the fact that Duncan played hard, played smart, and won championships. It makes sense given how similar these superstars were in their approach to the game and their quiet lead-by-example type style. As I've already alluded to in this video, Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain had a very fierce rivalry, to the point of the two being extremely petty with one another at times. Well, in 1965, Wilt Chamberlain signed a 3-year, $100,000 contract, which at the time made him the highest paid player in the NBA. When Bill Russell caught news of this, he was furious and demanded that the Boston Celtics pay him more than Wilt Chamberlain, otherwise he would consider retiring on the spot. The Celtics obliged and renegotiated Russell's contract and increased his income from $75,000 to $100,001, so that he was now the highest paid player in all of the NBA. These are just some of the amazing facts and details about Bill Russell. What are some of your favorites about him? Let me know in the comment section below.
Peter Press Maravich, also known as Pistol Pete. It's no secret that Maravich was a transcendent and quality basketball player, but just how good was he exactly? Well, let's do this like we do with all other players in this series and take it back to the beginning of their career. Long before the Pistol had played a professional basketball game, Pete's father Press was hell-bent on making his son Pete into an NBA talent. As a result, hard work and basketball obsession was very present in Pete's life from a very early age. It was evident as it led Pete to have arguably the greatest college basketball career of all time, as he averaged an absurd 44.2 points per game over his 3 years in Division I competition. Because of this, Pistol Pete was obviously a hot commodity heading into his NBA career. The 6'5" shooting guard was drafted 3rd overall in the 1970 draft by the Atlanta Hawks. You would think that a player with that kind of collegiate career would then be greeted with optimism from his new NBA teammates, but that actually wasn't the case. You see, Pete had a very flashy style of basketball that was frowned upon at the time that he was entering the NBA.
All of his fast breaks, no-look passes, behind-the-back passes, and circus shots weren't embraced by many players and many teams within the league, and the Hawks players were no exception. The other star players on the Hawks were their point guard Lou Hudson and their center Walt Bellamy, who both had a very conservative style of play. Even with some early on chemistry issues, Maravich still found ways to be productive and excellent in his rookie campaign, as he averaged 23.2 points, 4.4 assists, and 3.7 rebounds on 45.8% shooting. It was an impressive debut that ultimately resulted in a first-round exit at the hands of the New York Knicks. As the years went on, Maravich's skills and production continued to improve. He was a genius on the fast break, he was a passing wizard, he was likely the greatest ball handler at the time, and he was an absolute scoring machine as he could get a bucket in a multitude of ways. He was great at finishing in the paint, he had a reliable mid-range game, and he even had the range to score from 20 feet and beyond. During these years, the three-point line wasn't invented yet, but Maravich was without question one of the players who could have greatly benefited from the three-point shot. By his third year, he had broke out as an elite superstar in the NBA, as he was 5th in scoring and 6th in assists, as he averaged 26.1 points, 6.9 assists, and 4.4 rebounds on 44% shooting. In Maravich's first 4 years with the Hawks, he had established himself as a premier player, but the team still wasn't clicking enough to be among the elite teams of the NBA, and the Hawks were ready to make some changes. Enter the New Orleans Jazz. The Jazz were a 1974 expansion team. They needed someone to help bring attention and excitement to their new franchise, so they traded 2 players and 4 draft picks to the Hawks to acquire Maravich. It comes as no surprise that the new expansion New Orleans Jazz offered little help to Maravich, and despite his fantastic numbers, they never made the playoffs during those years. The lack of talented support didn't stop Maravich from putting on a strong display with the Jazz right as he was entering the prime of his career. In Pete's third year with the Jazz, he had the best season of his career as he led the league in scoring for the 76-77 season at 31.1 points per game. What makes this even more impressive is that this was the first season after the NBA and ABA merger, meaning the competition was stronger and the league was jam-packed with fantastic scorers that year. Despite competitors like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Billy Knight, David Thompson, George Gervin, Bob McAdoo, Rick Barry, Bob Lanier, and Julius Erving, Pete Maravich was still by far the leading scorer that season, with nearly a 5-point lead in his average ahead of the nearest scorer. The highlight of that year was when the Pistol dropped 68 points on the New York Knicks. At the time, it was the most points ever scored by a guard in NBA history. Remember, this was at a time when there was no three-point line, and this guard dropped 68 points. With the distance he had on many of his shots, he easily would have scored into the 70s if he had a three-point line. This also makes you wonder how many points he would have averaged that season and in his career if many of his baskets were worth 3 points instead of 2 points. Maravich was a force, but unfortunately, due to some consistent knee issues, Pete's career was cut very short. With his scoring and assists, he should be much higher on the all-time list, but he only played 658 games throughout his career. That's essentially only 8 full seasons of basketball, yet despite that, he still had 5 All-Star appearances and made 4 All-NBA teams. His final season was at just 32 years old. It was the 1979-1980 season, which was the NBA's first ever season with a three-point shot. He was well past his prime at this point, and the knee issues were laboring him throughout the year and caused him to miss many games. Despite the sample size, he still made 10 of his 15 three-point attempts, which is a remarkable 66%. One can only wonder what his career percentage would have been if the three-point shot had always been available to him. He played his final games coming off the bench as an offensive spark for the Boston Celtics, who were led by Larry Bird in his rookie campaign. For the Pistols' career, he averaged 24.2 points, 5.4 assists, 4.2 rebounds, and 1.4 steals on 44% shooting. His 24.2 points per game average is the 18th highest career average in NBA history, and it's the 7th highest average by a guard. This man's career was quite short, but it still left quite an impression on many other greats. All-time legend Elgin Baylor said this of Maravich: "Oscar Robertson was the best guard I've ever played against. Jerry West was the best I've ever played with. Pete was the best I've ever seen.
Years after his retirement, Maravich did lots of soul-searching before giving his life to Christ and becoming a Christian. Just a few years before his death, Maravich said, "I want to be remembered as a Christian, a person that serves Jesus to the utmost, not as a basketball player." And that brings us to January 5th, 1988, in Pasadena, California. At Pete's church, he was playing a pickup game with his friends when he collapsed and died due to a heart defect. He was only 40 years old, and he was playing the game he loved. So just how good was Pete Maravich really? Well, he was one of the hardest workers ever, one of the greatest passers, one of the greatest ball handlers, and one of the greatest scorers, which altogether makes him one of the greatest guards of NBA history. Let me know in the comments section where you rank Pete Maravich among the greatest guards of all time. Who's he better than, and who's better than him? Earvin Magic Johnson, one of the greatest players in NBA history, and many people still believe he's the greatest point guard of all time. Magic obviously had a historic beginning to his career, but what I believe isn't talked about enough is the iconic farewell to his NBA career, which was a roller coaster of emotions for the basketball community, finishing off with a satisfying ending that I personally will never forget. In order to understand the impact of Magic's beautiful moment, we first have to understand his journey to get there. Let's go all the way back to early June of 1991. At this time, Magic Johnson is just 31 years old. He's the runner-up for the league MVP, and he was the MVP in the previous season. He's coming off of a regular season where he averaged nearly 20 points and 12.5 assists, and he's about to make his 9th NBA Finals appearance as a 5-time NBA champion. To summarize it all, Johnson had just entered his early 30s and appeared to be every bit as good as he ever was before. Even without the recently retired Kareem Abdul-Jabbar as a teammate, Johnson was still able to lead his Lakers to the NBA Finals yet again. He had already built a resume worthy of being called the greatest point guard ever, and he seemingly still had a second half of his career ahead of him. When the 1991 Finals began, Magic was going toe-to-toe with the prime Michael Jordan. And although Michael ended up being the Finals MVP, Magic displayed a remarkable effort of his own. Many people believe that the Lakers never really had a true opportunity in this series, since Magic's two best scoring options, James Worthy and Byron Scott, both dealt with injuries throughout and missed a significant amount of time. Even without his two best weapons in the elimination game, Magic still put up 16 points, 20 assists, and 11 rebounds. What he didn't realize, and what none of the audience had realized either, is that this would be his last NBA Finals game of his entire career. Because a few months later, on November 7th, 1991, Magic held one of the most shocking press conferences in the history of sports. It was at this moment that the world became aware that the face of the Showtime Lakers was now HIV positive. At the time, little was known about the disease, so the assumption from almost everyone was that in a matter of months, he would lose a tremendous amount of weight and then pass away. Along with the horrific news of Magic's health, he also made it aware to the world that he was retiring from the Lakers, effective immediately. Imagine your favorite basketball player being at the peak of his abilities, and in a matter of seconds, he goes from one of the best players in the game to a retired player who could pass at any moment. Needless to say, this was a jarring pill to swallow for basketball fans, as seemingly everyone had their hearts broken for Magic on that day. Over the next several months and years, people would begin to learn a lot about living with HIV and the various details, like how it's transmitted and who's at risk. But many were still scared about the idea of being in contact with someone who had it. Then, in February of 1992, things got really interesting for Johnson and the basketball world. The NBA All-Star Game is an exhibition event where the fans vote and determine who will play for each conference. Despite the fact that Magic had retired from basketball, the fans still voted him in to be the starting point guard of the Western All-Stars. After receiving approval from doctors and from the league for Magic to play, the hype train was officially underway. The thing is, not everyone was so enthusiastic. Many players were concerned about their own well-being. Even Magic's former teammates like Byron Scott and AC Green said that he shouldn't participate. The player who was the most vocal about his displeasure with Magic competing was the Western Conference All-Star Karl Malone, who had this to say before the game was played.
If I get in a collision with a guy, it don't have to be Magic. It can be Joe Smoke. But the fact of the matter is, if you got the AIDS virus, it'll be hard for me to play as hard as I'm capable of playing.
Although there was plenty of drama heading into that night, there was also plenty of teammates and competitors who encouraged Magic to participate. Just as a spectator, you could tell that there was this awkward, unspoken tension in the air. But you could also sense the excitement and the magnitude of the moment, as the Orlando crowd gave Johnson a standing ovation during player introductions. Everyone understood that the ideal outcome was the West winning and Magic securing the All-Star Game MVP. But regardless of how badly the crowd wanted that, he still had to go out there and perform well. Seeing that Magic hadn't played a game in nearly a year, and seeing how he was now dealing with a life-altering disease, many people were concerned that he wouldn't have the conditioning or stamina to hang with the best players in the world. But all of those concerns were quickly put to rest soon after tip-off commenced. Although he built a legacy for himself as mainly a distributor, Magic was looking to score early on, and he did so with tremendous efficiency. Throughout the night, the West played with more energy and effort, and a 10-point lead quickly became a 20-point lead, and then a 20-point lead suddenly became a 30-point lead. The outcome was never really in question, but the MVP of the game appeared to be up for grabs, and the Western Conference's Clyde Drexler appeared to be the favorite heading into the second half with a monstrous stat line. After looking to score for a while, Magic finally got his first assists of the game with just under 9 minutes left in the third quarter, and then he got on a roll with his flashy Showtime passes that we were accustomed to. With less than 3 minutes left in the game, Magic suddenly hit the switch and displayed one of the most beautiful finishes in All-Star Game history. Just so you can sense the gravity and energy of this inspiring moment, I'll let you guys watch the final sequences of this game with no voiceover, and please pay attention to how Magic was at the center of it all.
135-106 with 2:46 to go. No doubt about this one.
There it is. There's the three.
Magic got his three.
Waiting for that moment to shoot the three.
Who has all the NBA three-point marks, most attempts, most made. Johnson, 2 in a row for Magic. He's going for the MVP. The Atlanta Hawk has 8. Chris Mullin for 3. It's out shooting the East in every quarter. And will be around the 60% mark, and another great pass. And Marley has his first points. Magic raises his. Well, this is a mismatch, and Magic would be the first to admit it. Michael Kind.
And that's 2, Magic said. Bring the next one on.
6, 5, three-pointer. Yes! Oh, my! Ladies and gentlemen, you just can't orchestrate it better than that.
When Magic hit that final falling away three-pointer, there was still 15 seconds left on the clock. Yet no one on the court seemed to even care, as they all surrounded and congratulated the Lakers legend. The game ended on the spot. It was a perfectly fitting and poetic way for the game to end, with a Magic Johnson jumper. Any question of who was the game's MVP now had an obvious answer, as Magic finished the game with 25 points, 9 assists, 5 rebounds, and 2 steals on 75% shooting. What started as a somewhat dramatic and awkward event ended up as one of the most uniting and inspiring conclusions in the history of sports. At the time, everyone believed that this was the last NBA game that he would ever participate in, and up until Kobe's farewell game in 2016, this exhibition contest stood alone as the most incredible farewell game by a Los Angeles Laker. Amazingly, over 3 decades later, Magic is still going, with the same smile and with the same enthusiasm that he was famous for. So what do you guys think? Where do you rank this performance among the greatest farewell games in basketball history?
Most of us have a general idea of how this story ends, but within that, there are many details that often get missed, and honestly, there's enough story in this season for there to be an entire documentary or an ESPN 30 for 30 on it. Alas, I'll do my best to tell the story of the 2013 Lakers and of Kobe's epic last stand. The Lakers were coming off of a disappointing 2011-2012 season that ended in the semifinals to the Oklahoma City Thunder. With their team growing older and no longer seen as legitimate title contenders, the Lakers were desperate to shake up their roster to return to title contention. The Lakers proceeded to make two major trades that offseason that left the NBA world stunned. First, the Lakers acquired future Hall of Famer Steve Nash for 4 future first-round draft picks. Nash was a passing wizard, but he was also in his late 30s and had been having off and on back problems the previous year. Regardless, LA fans were ecstatic with the acquisition. Next, the Lakers traded Andrew Bynum to land the big man, Dwight Howard. Dwight was already a 3-time Defensive Player of the Year and was widely considered as the top center in the NBA at this point. Howard was coming off of off-season back surgery though, and it was unclear how that might affect his performance. Even with some injury concerns, the Lakers were still one of the most hyped teams in the history of the NBA. With Steve Nash running the point, Kobe Bryant scoring, Metta World Peace shutting down the opponent defensively, and Pau Gasol and Dwight Howard dominating the paint, the Lakers seemed almost unstoppable. Many experts were predicting the Lakers to challenge the Bulls' 72-10 record, and a finals matchup with LeBron James and the Miami Heat almost seemed like a foregone conclusion. It was a very happy and exciting time in Los Angeles, that is, until the games actually started. Head coach of the Lakers, Mike Brown, was running the Princeton offense. It was an offense that obviously originated at Princeton University as early as the late 1930s. It's a system that relies heavily upon screens, motion passing, and backdoor cuts. It was an interesting strategy, considering that it was unfamiliar to veteran players and it was also so rarely seen in the NBA, but Mike Brown thought it would be the perfect system for this squad. Unfortunately, what seemed good in theory did not translate to the court, and LA started the preseason just 0-8. It was the preseason though, so the players downplayed those results in interviews. The real games began, and the Lakers started the regular season 1-4, and just like that, Mike Brown was fired. Now you know expectations are high when your brand new head coach only makes it 5 games into the season before he loses his job. The Lakers team had bigger issues though. They were slow, old, and clearly unhealthy. Dwight Howard's back surgery didn't allow him to have the same level of athleticism as before. Steve Nash had off-and-on injuries to go along with his ever-lingering back problems, and Metta World Peace was growing slower with age and was unable to stretch the floor on offense due to his inconsistent shooting. Assistant coach Bernie Bickerstaff took over as interim head coach, leading the Lakers to a 4-1 record during his short tenure. Meanwhile, the Lakers management searched for the head coach of the future. With the search underway, rumors began to swirl that a familiar face was the frontrunner for the position. 11-time NBA champion head coach Phil Jackson seemed to be a lock to land the job. Phil was initially offered the position, but asked the Lakers organization to give him the weekend to make his decision because he was unsure if he could make the commitment physically. Phil had come to his conclusion and was prepared to tell the Lakers on Monday morning that he would be accepting the job. According to Phil, he received a call on Sunday close to midnight from Lakers general manager Mitch Kupchak, notifying him to cancel their meeting since they've now selected Mike D'Antoni as their new head coach. Lakers management said they believed Mike fit the team's personnel best, but the move was baffling. The Lakers passed on Phil Jackson, a coach who has a history of success with the organization, with Kobe Bryant, and with managing egos. A coach who has already demonstrated how to run a dominant offense with 2 big men in the paint. Instead, the team opted for Mike D'Antoni, a coach who has never made an appearance to an NBA Finals. A coach who has had a reputation for having no clue how to coach defensively and having a mentality of simply trying to outscore opponents. A coach who is famous for his 7-second offense, which revolves around speed and perimeter shooting, was now in charge of the oldest team in the league with 2 big men and no perimeter presence. And the one and only player in the starting 5 who can hit the long ball consistently also happens to be the one guy who was supposed to be doing all the distributing. You see, the idea was that Mike D'Antoni and Steve Nash rejoining forces would lead them to replicating their glory days of the Phoenix Suns offense in the mid-2000s. Yep, that's right. The Lakers put all of their eggs in the basket of an underachieving head coach and an injury-prone 39-year-old point guard. Just days after Mike D'Antoni had been hired as the Lakers head coach, Phil Jackson was asked in an interview how he thought Mike would do in the role, and this was his response.
Mike, with the right personnel, is a great coach.
Okay.
You know, and this personnel really wasn't quite fit for Mike's coaching.
Tell me why.
Well, he likes a three-point shooting group of guys. He likes 2s and 3s in the corner. His great guard, Nash, was on the team. Obviously, Steve's a great guard. He can distribute the ball. But that other big guy has to be they call it now a stretch 4. He has to be able to shoot 3-pointers.
Yeah.
Powell wasn't quite fit into that. Powell and Howard together.
Okay.
Too big, too much of a load for that post. And he doesn't really like guys in the post. He likes guys outside.
How incredibly accurate this prediction was from Phil just goes to show how much of a brilliant coaching mind Phil Jackson was. Mike D'Antoni did move Pau Gasol to the stretch 4 position, resulting in frustration for Pau and him shooting a career-worst 46.6% from the field and a terrible 28.6% from three-point range. It came to a point where Mike was at such a loss of how to successfully run this offense that Mike eventually regulated future Hall of Famer Pau Gasol to a reserve role off the bench. Now, coaching decisions weren't the only things the Lakers struggled with this year. The players missed a grand total of 182 games due to injury, which includes games from Steve Nash's leg fracture, Dwight's torn right labrum, and Pau Gasol's plantar fasciitis in his right foot. To go along with these injuries was a ton of drama between the players. Dwight was receiving a tremendous amount of pressure from Kobe to play through his torn labrum due to the growing concern that the Lakers would miss the playoffs. This was just part of the issues between Kobe and Dwight that put a strain on their relationship. The issues were downplayed by the team though. An example of this was Kobe posting this photo to his Twitter page mocking the notion that there was fighting going on between the two players. The tension was undeniable though. Dwight's fun and easygoing personality was struggling to fit into the Lakers organization, and he never seemed to be fully embraced by the fans. The high expectations and demanding culture was taking its toll on Dwight. One night, there was a telling argument between Dwight and Steve Nash on the court. When one of the most lighthearted, positive, encouraging players in the history of the game is angrily yelling at you, you're probably not fitting in that well. Dwight was in a contract year and had the option at any point to sign an extension with the Lakers, but he wasn't doing that. The feeling was growing within the organization that Dwight wasn't only going to test free agency, but that he was also leaning towards leaving the Lakers. This had giant implications on two Lakers, the first being Kobe Bryant. At this time, Kobe was 34 years old. He was still playing at an elite level, but he had definitely lost a step or two of athleticism, and his days as an MVP caliber player were numbered. With his body aging, Dwight Howard likely leaving in the offseason, and Steve Nash on the verge of turning 40 at the start of next season, this meant one thing for Kobe. This would likely be his last chance to win a 6th NBA championship. A championship that would put him on the same level as his childhood idol, Michael Jordan. A championship to put him ahead of Laker great Magic Johnson and finally solidify himself as the greatest Laker ever. Kobe knew this was his last chance, and Kobe played like it. Bryant was in the MVP conversation even though his star-studded team was floating around the 8th seed of the playoffs. That's because everyone could see that despite everything this team was going through, Kobe was carrying the team through it. Despite all the injuries, despite all the drama, despite all the adversity, come hell or high water, Kobe was willing this team to the playoffs. The other Laker who had giant implications on him was none other than Mike D'Antoni. The Lakers had no chemistry on and off the court. Mike D'Antoni hadn't replicated his glory days in Phoenix, and the Lakers' offense instead was clearly inferior to other teams around the league. Pau Gasol was grumbling over his role within the offense, Kobe was among the leaders in minutes per game when he should have reduced minutes at his age, Dwight was discontent to the point of looking like he planned on leaving the team, and on top of all of that, one of the most hyped teams in the history of the NBA was on the verge of missing the playoffs. All of these things could be pointed back to Mike D'Antoni and his inability to coach this team. At this point, it had become clear to many spectators and to Mike himself that Mike D'Antoni was fighting for his job. If Mike was going to have any future with his team, this team had to make the playoffs. This led Mike to make a decision, a big decision, a decision that I believe ended Kobe's career as a top player in this league. Mike was going to play Kobe every single minute of every single game if that's what it took to win each night. It was a risky decision considering Kobe's age and the significant amount of miles on his legs at this point, but Kobe agreed to the decision. At the time of this decision, the Lakers were 37-36 and just a half game ahead of the Utah Jazz for the 8th and final playoff spot. The Lakers won 3 out of the next 4 games, with Kobe raising his game to another level. He was doing absolutely everything for the Lakers, from the scoring, to the facilitating, to the hustle plays. Just 4 games into Kobe's new ridiculous workload, Ramona Shelburne, a senior writer who's been following the Lakers throughout her career, wrote an article about Kobe's insane amount of minutes and the risks involved. D'Antoni said in the article, "We're short-handed right now and we're playing it very tight. Normally this wouldn't happen, but we've put ourselves in a hole and Kobe is our best bet going forward to win games. He said he's going to retire after a year, so we're going to get our money's worth for 2 years. I don't know what to tell you." The decision continued to receive some criticism, but it was clear Mike was sticking with the plan and Kobe continued to grind, leading the Lakers to win the next 2 games over the Hornets and Trailblazers, and that brings us to April 12th, 2013. Kobe was on a tear, averaging 28.9 points, 8.4 assists, and 7.3 rebounds while playing 45.6 minutes per game during this stretch. This Friday night was another crucial home game against the young and upcoming Golden State Warriors. It would take everything from Kobe to get a win this night, because Steph Curry was on the opposing side and he was on his game this evening. After all the minutes leading up to this match, Kobe had described his body as feeling a little stiff to start the game. He played the entire first quarter, but didn't end up scoring his first points until the second quarter, and then he began to hit his groove. For every difficult shot that Curry was hitting, Kobe had an answer, refusing to let this game slip away. He played the entire second quarter. With 10 minutes left in the third, Kobe drove baseline and was met by several defenders. After the contact, he was on the ground bracing his knee. The stadium went silent as if their worst fears were being realized, and it appeared as if Kobe's body had finally taken more than it could handle. After a couple minutes, Kobe walked it off and remained in the game, as the entire building took a sigh of relief. 6 minutes left in the third quarter now, and again, Kobe attacks the basket and comes up limping. This time, it was his right ankle. Red flag after red flag, indicators that this load is too much, but Kobe fought through the pain and remained in the game without missing a minute. Into the fourth quarter, with Kobe and Curry continuing to trade baskets, the Lakers found themselves down by 6 points with just minutes left. Then, Kobe hit a clutch 3 to make it a one-possession game, and the crowd was going nuts. The Lakers get a stop and Kobe again has the ball. Harrison Barnes is all over him, and then Kobe does what he's done so many times and buries another clutch 3 right in the defender's face. The crowd erupts, and the look on Kobe's face is sheer determination, which leads the Lakers commentator Stu Lance to say,
"The Mamba is looking like the Mamba."
I remember watching this game live, being in awe and appreciating vintage Kobe in the latter years of his career. The Warriors score again. Kobe has the ball and makes a cut to the basket, and then he goes down. The crowd waited patiently for Kobe to jump back up and play through it like he had time and time again, but this time it was different. He said he knew his Achilles was torn. As he was sitting on the floor, Kobe then did the most Kobe Bryant thing he's ever done and tried to force the Achilles to reattach itself by rubbing the wounded area. It obviously didn't work. Kobe knew his season was likely done, but on this night, his job was not yet finished on the court. At this point, Kobe had fought through so much and had pushed through so much adversity, but he had one more fighting effort to make. Kobe had to shoot 2 free throws. If Kobe's injury forced him to leave the game and he was unable to shoot these free throws, then the Warriors would have had the choice of which Lakers player they wanted to shoot the free throws in place of Kobe. With a terrible foul shooter like Dwight Howard on the team, and with the Lakers down by 2 points, with only minutes remaining and with the playoffs on the line, shooting the foul shots was the only option in Kobe's mind. He proceeded to gingerly approach the free throw line, with his face visibly trying to suppress the pain. Kobe proceeded to knock down both free throws and provide the last bit of help he would ever make for the Lakers at a postseason run. Kobe walked into the locker room with a torn Achilles under his own strength, once again demonstrating the proud warrior that he is. If you ask me, this was the true end of the Kobe Bryant we always knew. To Kobe's credit, he did make his return to the court, but from this point on, his career was plagued by injuries, and he never again played at an elite MVP caliber level. Although this was a sad and tragic ending to this season for Kobe, there was strangely a lot of beauty in it too. Kobe was always known as a warrior, and that's what he was this year as he carried the team and fought to the very end. The 60 points in his final game was incredible, but to me, this Achilles game versus the Warriors was the end of the Black Mamba. Kobe's career ended on a 17-65 team on a meaningless regular season game, but the Black Mamba's reign ended making his final stand on his last championship push, forcing his body to give everything it could, even to the point that it eventually broke down on him. Thanks to his efforts, the Lakers did make the playoffs that year. They were swept in the first round of the playoffs by the San Antonio Spurs. Dwight Howard left in the offseason, and Mike D'Antoni was fired 1 year later. There are many what-ifs when we look back at the twilight years of Kobe's career. What if the Chris Paul trade had actually gone through? What if the Lakers hired Phil Jackson instead of Mike D'Antoni? Phil Jackson was clearly the better fit for that team. If Phil was the one coaching those Lakers, do they win more games, resulting in Kobe playing less minutes and never tearing his Achilles? Did Kobe lose out on more elite years all because of this decision? I believe so, but we'll never know for sure.